Is it recording? It's recording, is it? Oh, what happened? God, God.
Reimagining the systems of incarceration and punishment. Westnet interview series. The number of women being incarcerated in Australia has been exponentially increasing in the last decade, with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women accounting for much of the growth. Consider this: between 2009 and 2019, there was a 64% increase in women's incarceration compared to a 45% increase in men's incarceration. And even during the lockdowns, back in 2020 and 2021, there was a 5% increase in the female population. With Aboriginal
Yeah, but the man was walking around or struggling, place to live, place to stay, in the huts, in the garbage bin, places we went, papu, a cat got your tongue, man, look for life, gang, bam, bam, man was abused heaps too, on the policeman, corruption.
Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women comprising 10% of the total female prison population. Moreover, evidence suggests
I like to fight and be generous and good person and understanding, good manners and good listening, good understand. Beautiful. You're the best actor. You need a girlfriend.
suggests that an overwhelming majority of women in prison
Una girlfriend, God and enter there, girlfriend, the relationship, love and hate, leak the can out, love and hate, leave the talk when I tell you, FM, radio, compadre, I need a girlfriend, I love you, you're very nice boy, please, very nice, sexy, and punch up, crazy. What happened, Hector? Well, crazy, whoa,
are
papa.
victims of domestic violence, with 70–90%.
I'm going to question it. I'm going to question it. Fuck the question. Do the question. Question it. Fuck you.
Percent of them experiencing some kind of physical, sexual, or emotional
Go fuck. Question it. Oh, name of God.
emotional abuse as children or adults. But what is this data telling us? The reality is that this increase in women's incarceration disproportionately affects women affected by experiences of oppression and victimization, and that come from the most marginalized communities in Australia. And it is all
It's there for you to provide us for AI, the best intelligent assistant, pro editing, AI robot making, Google Play Store.
also a stark reflection about the nature and proliferation of gender-based violence in this country. We talked with Debbie Kilroy, abolition activist, lawyer, and CEO of Sisters Inside, about the importance
The mining family can't give us money, can't give 1 million, want to the money, give us the million, give us the money, financial, other scam, fuck you.
importance of including lived experience perspectives and voices, especially in any work related to the criminalized community, how the criminalized community is being actively discriminated against when advocating for their rights, how the intersecting oppressions feeds the incarceration cycle of women, and how the women's specialist services could do more. And lastly, Debbie invites us all in reimagining the carceral system of punishment and incarceration and advocate for a future focused on
It's gonna be a fucking lifestyle. Cat got your tongue, fight. I love you, need a girlfriend.
healing and love instead. 1. Debbie, thank you for joining us. We are honored to have you here. For those reading who don't know you, could you tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to be an advocate for the rights of women in prison? Thank you for having me here. I am an abolition activist, a lawyer and CEO of Sisters Inside, an abolitionist organization which advocates for the collective human rights of women and girls, and feminine identifying people in prison, and their families. I came to this work because of my own lived prison experience, and everything that I saw while inside and what I experienced while trying to break free from.
Good, good, good. Very nice. Cat, that's good. That's good. Oh, very nice. Cat, got your tongue.
From the criminal injustice system. I was criminalized as a young child and first imprisoned at 14 years of age. I spent my subsequent teenage years in and out of prison. Then, in 1989, I was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment for drug trafficking. It was while I was inside that I witnessed my friend, Debbie Dick, being murdered in the overcrowded prison, Bogo Road Jail. With everything that I saw inside, I grew angrier and angrier. I was angry at the gross injustice. And that anger ultimately became a productive force as it spurred a commitment and drive in me to fight against the criminalization and imprisonment of women. This drive of mine and the work I came to do was partly to honor my friend, Debbie, but also to honor every woman and girl who had suffered and or died at the hands of the prison industrial complex. I saw prisons as needless places of suffering, and as places of violence. I resolved to do something about that. Prisons steal from all of us, and they stole more than just time from me. I lost everything when I went inside my marriage, my home, my kids and my job. I don't want them to take anything else from anyone else. With you having been intimately and uniquely involved in the prison and judicial system from a variety of perspectives. How important is lived experience to the work of an advocate/activist? How can governments and the community better involve ex-prisoners in service delivery and system reform? I would argue that there is no greater importance or relevance than that of the lived experience perspective, particularly in relation to work with the criminalized community. The adage "there should be nothing about us, without us" isn't just a saying. It is an ethos that we all should live by. If you are sitting around the table discussing a particular group of people and you look around and see that that group is not represented at that table, discussions should cease until appropriate representation is found. How can you possibly understand the needs of a population group if you are not them? How can you make decisions for that group of people? How can you design services or know their needs? Unless you know that oppression intimately, you are not the expert. No matter your degree of knowledge or your proximity to that person or population group, you will never truly know. However, the lived prison experience activist is often ignored in this country. We witness panels and conversations being held right across the nation, which do not include our voices. Policies are written, services designed, and programs developed, which do not include our voices or our experiences. They do not reflect our aspirations or our vision for our needs or healing. Largely, that is because the criminalized community are regarded as a group who are not worthy of consultation. We are a group that is pathologized as the problem to be fixed, and others are deemed to know better than we do. Add to that, there is an inherent risk to us when we do speak out or up about services or systems. A risk to our liberty. Therefore, organizations that want to involve the lived prison, activist or advocate in their work, need to be mindful of that risk and wear it themselves. They must ensure that meetings and spaces are safe for the criminalized participant. For example, one of the women in our national network commented this week that she wanted to attend the local community consultation on the Disability Royal Commission with the community indigenous advocate in her regional town. However, that meeting was being held at a licensed club venue. As this member is on parole, she was unable to attend, as all people on parole are unable to attend licensed club venues. Therefore, this community consultation specifically and actively excludes the criminalized community, and our needs remain unaddressed, unheard, not considered and invisibilized through agency ignorance, startling given the high rate of disabled people who are criminalized. This kind of thing happens all the time, and it's not good enough. 3. Some people's experiences of prison life are limited to what they read or see in the media. Are these accurate representations? Are there key issues for women that are not openly talked about or understood? It's funny because what you see and hear about jails would lead you to think that the biggest thing you have to fear in prison is other prisoners. But what I would argue is the biggest risk to your life and well-being is the carceral system itself and the state agents, which are paid to enforce the regime, with both force and impunity. Though what I just said is an unpopular thing in our society to speak and hear. We are taught from a young age that the crims are the baddies, and the police are the goodies. It is this good/bad binary that leads us to believe that one group of people deserve more humanity than the other. It's just unsustainable and doesn't create a safe and abundant community for all, only some. The key issue for women is definitely the increasing criminalization of us. It is at this apex that we find our oppression. Women, and specifically Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, are the fastest growing prison cohort in this country. Nationally, the proportion of women in the Australian prison population rose 5% between 2020 and 2021. And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women comprise 10% of the prison population. The situation is unconscionable. Most distressing is the system's persistent criminalization of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the resulting deaths in custody. The figure presently sits at 505 people killed in custody since 1991, and that figure grows every single month. We should all be angry. But some of you aren't, and I don't understand that. According to data released from the ABS in 2018, an overwhelming majority of women in prison have experienced domestic violence, with data suggesting that between 70% to 90% of incarcerated women have been physically, sexually, or emotionally abused as children or adults. Based on this, would you say that family violence seems to be a pathway to offending? I wouldn't say that family violence is a pathway to offending. Rather, I would say that women in this country are criminalized. Intersecting oppressions render women particularly vulnerable to obtrusion by the state. And many women at a very young age are set upon a trajectory of state-sanctioned interventions and ultimately incarceration. Women and girls defending themselves against violence often become the targets of law enforcement, a phenomenon which is increasingly being referred to as the sexual abuse to prison pipeline. Additionally, the statistics presented above are reflective of the nature and proliferation of gender-based violence in this country rather than a reflection of the type of woman that finds herself in prison, as reflected in other countries.
If you wanted a baby or around walking, whatever, wanted some drugs or baby, and you wanted sex or whatever it is, and then all you want, and you got cash for sex. There you go. Good. Extra or something, settings, wedding, bedding, down, wow, everything.
Countries. Incarcerated women and girls come from the most disadvantaged backgrounds and represent the most socially, culturally, and economically marginalized people in Australia. There is a growing mountain of evidence which speaks to the trauma women have suffered prior to their incarceration, with a majority suffering from a range of gender-based violence, including poverty, housing instability, homelessness, domestic violence, child abuse, poor health, trauma, and both surveillance and control by the state, because you have a violence problem in this country. And until we reckon with that fact, we will not truly be able to address it fully. 5. Are incarcerated women more vulnerable during their stay in prison or after release? How can women's specialist services better support women in prison or that have been in prison? Or what should the role of women's specialist services in supporting women in prison be? Incarcerated women and girls are vulnerable through the entire carceral pipeline. Once the state has their eyes set on you, you are marked, therefore, at risk. Incarcerated women are almost completely powerless while in prison, relying on the state to meet their every basic need. Then, when they are released, they have to start their lives all over again, with very little to no support under the constant gaze of the state. Economic violence against criminalized women exists before, during, and after our imprisonment. Add to that, over the past 2 decades, the real value of income support and the quantum of
Only if they had high blood pressure, or she was nice, good looking, wanted to do sport, or could not get out, or doing whatever, smoking marijuana, or doing drugs, or doing no home, nowhere to live, having sex with strangers, all fully sick, prostitutes. I love you.
public housing in Australia has reduced substantially, and the cost of public transport and other essentials has increased exponentially. Most criminalized women live far below the poverty line, while at the same time, systems of surveillance and imprisonment seem to have access to a bottomless pit of government funding, resulting in a gross economic divide. Economically, it is almost impossible for women to meet the demands of income support, parole and child protection authorities. Yet, the system demands that women conform to the mostly irrational demands of these authorities to stay out of prison, retain or regain custody of their children and meet the basic survival needs of themselves and their children despite economic disadvantage. This system is constructed in a way to ensure that women fail. What we need from specialist services is to do the two-pronged work of supporting women who are held captive by the carceral system while you are standing with us to actively tear apart the prison industrial system. Too many services only want to do the work of support. It's not enough, and it is, in my view, unethical and most certainly contributes to the prison industrial complex, making you complicit in the carceral structures. We need non-criminalized people to weaponize their privilege, and that need is most urgent. Right now, we have a prison in Victoria being expanded. We have children in Dondale. We have children being placed in solitary, in adult prisons. Silence from support services is deafening and, worse, harmful. We need you to be activists, too. 6. COVID-19 has had wide-ranging impacts. We know from global data that lockdowns across the world increase not only the incidence of domestic and family violence, but also catalyzed violence for the first time in thousands of homes. What was the impact of COVID for women in prisons? We know that everyone in prison suffered, and continues to. COVID-19 functioned as an excuse for prisons to further punish prisoners at a systemic level. The use of seclusion, isolation and lockdowns to reduce the risk of transmission of the disease, as well as the failure of many prisons to provide free access to soap, running water, and hand sanitizer, impacted the health and well-being of all prisoners inside. Added to that, visits ceased or were seriously disrupted, meaning that mothers and children were unable to have visits for months on end. Little to no practical support was provided to the parents to maintain contact with their children. And the mental health and well-being of both parent and child have and continues to suffer. The National Network for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls in the Fuji called for the freeing of all prisoners and maintains that call. Nobody should be in prison, and a global pandemic was a good time for the government to commence a decarceration process before someone died. 7. Do you feel that the second national plan to end violence against women and children will assist women in prison? The national plan makes a small mention of women in prison, so I would say it falls well short of articulating an evidence-based or expert-informed plan or strategy to ensure that women and girls who are in or have been to prison will be able to live a life free from violence, personal, family, or state abuse in this country. If we are going to work towards eliminating the kinds of violence that criminalized women and girls face, we must work to address the ongoing impacts of colonization and state violence, and transform the social, political and economic factors that continue to criminalize our sisters. We need substantial policy action to rectify structural barriers to safety and equality and an abolitionist framework to guide the national plan. We do not see this. So I would say the national plan will fail the women I am working for and alongside. 8. You talk openly about the need to abolish prisons and the need for new models that are not based on punishment and incarceration. In your ideal world, with no prisons, what would support and rehabilitation look like broadly? I am often asked what new models I would like to see introduced in a new world free of prisons, and to be honest, it's not my place to be prescriptive about what those new worlds look like. I know this answer frustrates some people, but right now, our current system isn't solving all our problems, and nobody has all the answers. So it's unfair for abolitionists to be expected to. The beautiful thing about abolition is that it creates a space for us to dream collectively about what that future will look and feel like. It gives us the opportunity to work to change the conditions which produce harm and people who harm, so we don't need systems of punishment and exile. Abolition also allows us to develop and design systems and services, and spaces that reflect individual community needs and aspirations. And it allows us to take a more nuanced view of the world. It removes the one-size-fits-all approach to service provision and invests in the unique needs of local communities, because if we persist in trying to reform this system, which serves only the interests of private property and capital, while enacting extreme violence, we will not realize safety for all. Ultimately, abolition is about recognizing the complexity of harm and the indispensability of humanity. What I can say, though, is that a world free of prisons, punishment, surveillance, and exile will be a future that focuses on abundance and healing rather than scarcity and harm. It will be a world focused on safety for all rather than revenge and vengeance. This process is going to be incredibly slow-going and hard work as we seek to undo systems we have come to rely upon, and unlearn processes we have internalized our whole lives, but it is necessary work. Because abolition has the capacity to change the face of justice in this country and deliver love, safety and real liberty for all. Not just the select few that this colony deems worthy. Abolition gives us life. It gives us a future. We must start by shifting funds away from policing and prisons. It is why activist campaigns like Build Homes, Not Prisons and Close Dondale are so important right now, as well as mutual aid campaigns like A Disability Justice Australia and Number Freer, and community-based initiatives like Beyond Bricks and Bars. Locally led initiatives are moving us along the path to abolition, because our emancipation will not be found in the halls of parliament or boardrooms. It will come in the streets and in our communities, led by the people. We just have to find our power. 9. And lastly, what are the main changes you are hoping to see in the future that will advance the rights of women in prison? And what are Sisters Inside's immediate priorities over the next 12 months? My priority is to continue to speak about abolition and encourage people to see it as the common sense option for a safer future. I am an activist, so my work is in the struggle for freedom for all of my sisters, and my work will not be done until everyone is free. In the meantime, Sisters Inside will keep working to free women and girls from state cages, and will grow a network of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls and feminine identifying people to make sure that the voices of criminalized people are present in all public spaces, and that we are able to have a real say in the political landscape of this country, because there should be nothing about us without us. About the series, the Westnet interview series brings an array of diverse opinions, perspectives and insights from different professionals, practitioners, experts, and advocates on violence against women and girls and other forms of gender-based violence. We aim to share the full diversity of voices to help inform and expand the narratives around ending violence in all its forms. Not all the voices will agree on every aspect of what to do and how to do it, but all the voices are from those committed to ending gender-based violence. You can read the rest of our interviews here.
So we wanna get to, we wanna get to, we wanna get to, Abito Patu.
Meet the Team State Election Tasmania Jackie Lambie Network. The Jackie Lambie Network's role in state parliament. We're being fair dinkum with the Tasmanian people. We're a minor party, it's unrealistic to announce detailed policies. Unlike the government, we don't have access to the books. Our priorities are fixing the health system, getting relief for people struggling with the cost of living, and making sure that every Tasmanian has a roof over their heads. Labour and Liberal are the major parties in Tasmania, and whoever gets to become the government will be making policy. If we get people elected in Parliament, it will their job to dissect the legislation and offer up amendments to get better outcomes for Tasmania. The same job that Jackie and Tammy have been doing so successfully in the Senate. Remember when Jackie wiped Tasmania's public housing debt, securing more than $200 million in debt relief? That action alone nearly doubled how much money was available each year in the public housing budget. Have we seen a doubling in how much public housing is being built though? No, we haven't. Electing the JLN into state parliament will give us the ability to hold the government to account when our federal senators deliver something for Tasmania. We're not running career politicians for state parliament. We're running normal people who have had successful careers in a wide range of industries. They care deeply about their communities, and will fight tooth and nail to deliver better outcomes for their electorates and the whole state. They will bring common sense back into Parliament. Wouldn't that be nice? Three former organizers of Hong Kong's annual Tiananmen Square protest vigil lose conviction, appeal, ABC News. In short, three former organizers of Hong Kong's annual vigil in remembrance of the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests have lost their bid to overturn their conviction. A judge quashed the appeal, saying there was enough evidence to uphold the decision. The trio received a 4.5-month sentence last year. Three former organizers of Hong Kong's annual Tiananmen Square vigil have lost their bid to overturn their conviction because they refused to provide authorities with information on the group under a national security law. Chow Hang Tung, Tang En Gok Kwan and Sui Hun Kwong were core members of the Hong Kong Alliance in support of patriotic, democratic movements of China, before it disbanded under the shadow of the Beijing-imposed law in 2021. They received a sentence of 4.5 months last year, widely seen as part of a crackdown on dissidents following massive pro-democracy protests in 2019. The Alliance was long known for organizing candlelight vigils in the city on the anniversary of the Chinese military's crushing of the 1989 protests in Beijing. Chinese officials initially claimed 241 people were killed, but other estimates indicate thousands lost their lives in the massacre. Critics said the vigil's shutdown reflected that civil liberties were shrinking, despite promises they would be kept intact when the former British colony returned to Chinese rule in 1997. Before the group dissolved, police had sought details about its operations and finances in connection with alleged links to pro-democracy groups overseas. Police accused the group of being a foreign agent, but it refused to cooperate, arguing police were arbitrarily labeling pro-democracy organizations as foreign agents. Judge Anna Lai at the Court of Appeal dismissed their appeal on Thursday, saying she was satisfied that there was ample evidence to support the convictions. Last December, their lawyer argued in an appeal hearing that the activists were denied a fair trial because they had not been shown the full evidence that suggested the group was a foreign agent. During previous legal proceedings at the lower court, some crucial details, including the names of groups that were alleged to have links with the alliance, were redacted. The court ordered a partial redaction of some information after prosecutors argued that a full disclosure would jeopardize an ongoing probe into national security cases. After reading the unredacted materials, Judge Lai said the omission was done properly. Their non-disclosure would not have caused any unfairness to the appellants, she wrote in her ruling. She said the prosecution was not required to prove that the alliance was a foreign agent in this case. Under the security law's implementation rules, the police chief can request a range of information from a foreign agent. Chow and two other former alliance leaders Li Xian and Albert Ho were charged with subversion in a separate case under the sweeping law in 2021. It was still unclear when their trial would begin. The annual vigil organized by the Alliance at Hong Kong's Victoria Park was the only large-scale public commemoration of the June 4 crackdown on Chinese soil. For decades. After the lifting of COVID-19 restrictions last year, the park was occupied by a carnival organized by pro-Beijing groups to celebrate Hong Kong's handover in 1997. Those who tried to commemorate the event near the site were detained. A pair posted 52 meters ago 52 minutes ago. Reece Walsh lights up Brisbane, but concerns over Adam Reynolds as Brisbane down, South Sydney 28-18 ABC News. Brisbane Whiz kid Reece Walsh won the battle of the fullbacks with Latrell Mitchell in a 28-18 win over an error-riddled South Sydney. Rabbitohs coach Jason Demetriou tagged his sides display a horror show. Walsh scored 2 tries at Lang Park in front of 35,507 fans on Thursday night, the second after a Mitchell blunder, when he failed to gather an infield kick by Broncos winger Jesse Arthurs. Broncos skipper Adam Reynolds battled through a recurrence of a right knee injury before leaving the field in the 70th minute. It stirred up what was already there and is pretty sore. "I'll get another scan and see how it is," Reynolds said, as he races the clock to be fit for next week's clash with Penrith. Apart from a 6-minute spurt after half time where bench utility Silva Havili scored a try and set one up, the Rabbitohs were diabolical. The Broncos led 12-0 at the break after both sides bumbled and fumbled their way through 40 excruciating minutes for their respective coaches. The Rabbitohs were the worst offenders, completing just 10 of 20 sets. They made a laundry list of elementary errors, including losing a scrum, when they had the feed. "I couldn't fault our defensive effort and resolve, but we are just shooting ourselves in the foot. Whether we can't feed the scrum properly. First tackle errors or kicking into our own player or penalties for blocking," Demetriou said. It was a horror show. After the Havili heroics, the Rabbitohs went back to their first halfways. Walsh and centers Selwyn Cobbo and Kotoni Staggs razzled and dazzled after Broncos forward leaders Pat Carrigan and Payne Haas dominated. 2 pieces of brilliance by Reynolds and Walsh lit up the half. Reynolds, up against his former club, slid a masterful grubber kick through for winger Dean Mariner to score in the 18th minute. Walsh made 2 handling errors early, but he didn't let that dent his confidence. Instead, the talismanic number 1 stepped and weaved his way past 6 Rabbitohs defenders to score with blistering speed. ABC Sport will be live blogging every round of the AFL and NRL seasons in 2024. Hooker Damien Cook was sin-binned in the 29th minute and the Broncos were unable to make the visitors pay through their own mistakes. Forward Kobe Hedrington muffed the best chance when he dropped the ball with the line wide open after being put through a hole by Carrigan. Havili crashed through in the 43rd minute, then 3 minutes later put Davy Moll over under the sticks to make it 12-12. It was Walsh who stepped up when the match was on the line, not Mitchell, who scored a consolation try. In games like this, where it's pretty tight, you need those brilliant guys, and Reece is one, Broncos coach Kevin Walters said. It was a good performance from him. It was an ugly game. As a team we aren't quite nailing it, but you need to win those games at this time of the year. Walsh and Cobbo combined beautifully to put Arthurs over in the corner, before the Brisbane custodian sealed the deal with his second try. Mariner iced the win with a brilliant chip and chase for his second try. The Broncos' young guns were superb, with second rower Brendan Piakra smashing opposite Cameron Murray on several occasions. The hosts were far from perfect, but the Rabbitohs are 0-2 and look set for a long season. Broncos 5/8 Ezra Mam, in his first game after Spencer, Lenia's racial slur, almost scored from a grubber and had a sound game. Up! Relive all the action from tonight in our live blog. Signing off. That'll do us. Another game in the books. Be sure to check back in tomorrow, and on Saturday and again on Sunday we'll be blogging every NRL game of the season. See you next time. Broncos presser. Reynolds says he stirred up what was already there with his knee. He'll get a scan in the morning. Beyond that, he's playing it with a pretty straight bat. Walters says the Broncos are a long way off where they want to be, but praises Walsh for his ability to break the game open. Jai Arrow return. The Rabbitohs are hopeful Jai Arrow can return in 4 to 8 weeks from his shoulder injury, which is not great. I mean, it's good they'll have him back this year, but that's a long time without one of their more established forwards, and they really need some muscle up the guts right now. Dimitriou speaks. The Rabbitohs coach is pretty scathing of his side, labels a lot of their mistakes as dumb, and says Jack Whiten's imminent return won't mean much if they can't hold the ball. Highlights. Here's all the big moments from tonight in case you missed any of them. Waiting on the press conferences. We'll run this blog just a little longer in case Kevin Walters gives us an update on Reynolds at the presser. After a loss like that, Dimitriou might have a few things to say in his press conference as well. Full time, Broncos 28, Souths 18. Mitchell scores a 60-meter solo try to finish. He got on the inside of Staggs, burst in the clear, and swerved away from Walsh. It was pretty sick, and he converts after the siren. Brisbane win 28-18. 76th minute, Broncos try. One more try for Brisbane, and it's through Mariner. Walters ducks down the blind side. Mariner is one-on-one with Johnston, and he audaciously chips over the top and regathers to score. Another beauty. Brisbane have been well below their best tonight, but when they've got it right, it's been great to watch. Walsh converts and it's 28-12. 74th minute, Souths no try. Mitchell pokes a kick in behind Johnston, and Mariner shadows it towards the dead ball line. Johnston tries to reach for the ball, but he knocks it on. 20-meter restart. Reynolds off. Reynolds is done for the night and gone straight up the tunnel. Channel 9 reports they're looking for ACL damage and they're quite concerned. Injury alert, Adam Reynolds. Now the reason Walsh kicked the goal there was because Reynolds was down getting treatment on his knee. He looked as though he was coming off, but he's going to soldier on. Remember, he was in a bit of doubt for this game with that same knee injury. One more Brisbane try, or another 10 minutes. And they'll probably give him an early mark. 63rd minute, Broncos try. On his own 40, Walsh knifes through on the last tackle. He finds Cobbo out wide, who goes to Arthurs, and the winger kicks inside. The bounce beats Mitchell, and guess who's there? Walsh. He scores his second and kicks the goal as well for good measure. Broncos led 22-12. 58th minute, Broncos penalty. Ilias kicks the ball into Duncan for an accidental offside, which puts Brisbane back on the attack. An offside gives them a 6 again, but Walsh overcooks it and Johnson latches onto an intercept to get Souths off the hook. But then they shoot themselves in the foot again as Kepi gives away a penalty as a kick blocker. You know, I'm not really sure about that rule. Don't know if it was needed. Regardless, Brisbane go on the attack. Payne Haas is back on. The big man is back out there, and seems untroubled by that knee. Great news for Brisbane. 52nd minute, Broncos try. A charge down kick falls for Cobbo, he flies down the right side again, and Brisbane are on the attack. Walsh kicks for himself and very nearly gets there. First, only for Souths to clean it up and knock it dead. Mitchell goes short with the dropout, but Cobbo takes it cleanly. And it's Cobbo, who is having a whale of a game, who makes the key pass. Walsh hits him long. Cobbo taps it on for Arthurs and the winger is over in the corner. Brisbane right the ship. Reynolds misses, but their Bronx led 16-12. 47th minute, South's error. Murray puts it down on the third tackle of the exit set. Piacra got right under the ball. Brisbane finally get a bit of ball. This game has turned on its head since their last set. Reynolds goes for an early kick, but Walker takes a slips catch and takes off upfield to relieve the pressure. It's all coming up Rabbitohs at the moment. 45th minute, Souths try. Souths earn a penalty on the get-out set and have another chance early. They look like a different team now, very energized. And then it's Havili again. He goes short to Mole, who strolls through a huge gap to score next to the posts. The Rabbitohs have levelled up before Brisbane have touched the ball in the second half. 43rd minute, Souths try. Arthurs drops a bomb on the first set of the second half to give Souths the chance to strike back early. And it's Silva Havili who is the unlikely man to do it. He gets the ball on a two-pass shift. Straightens up and powers through Ricky to score. Great effort from the Tongan international. Mitchell converts and Souths have narrowed it to 12-6. Second half underway. Brisbane kick off to get the second stanza started. Halftime, Broncos 12, Souths 0. An error-filled clash thus far, but that's the only reason Souths are still in it. They look way off the pace. Rabbitohs need a big turnaround to get back into it because if Brisbane's execution gets a little better, this could get really ugly really fast. German footballer Andreas Brehme, who scored the winning goal in the 1990 World Cup final, dies at 63. ABC News. Andreas Brehme, who scored the only goal, as West Germany beat Argentina to win the 1990 World Cup final, has died. He was 63. German national football team. World Cup wins. 1954 final West Germany 3 Hungary 2. 1974 final West Germany 2 Netherlands 1. 1990 final West Germany 1 Argentina 0. 2014 final Germany 1 Argentina 0 asterisk. Asterisk national team played as West Germany from 1949-1990, Germany from 1990 onwards. Brehme's partner Suzanne Schaefer confirmed his death in a statement to Germany's Depart news agency on Tuesday. Schaefer said Brehme died suddenly and unexpectedly in the night from a cardiac arrest. Andreas Brehme will forever be in our hearts as a World Cup winner and more importantly, as a very special person, his former club Bayern Munich said on X, formerly Twitter. Kaiserslautern, another of his former clubs, also paid tribute. FCK mourns the passing of Andreas Briem. He wore the Red Devils shirt for a total of 10 years and became German champion and German Cup winner with FCK. In 1990 he fired the German national team to the World Cup title with his penalty and became a football legend. The FCK family is in deep mourning and our thoughts are with Andy's family and friends. Briem, who played mostly as an attacking left back, was a star of German soccer in the 1980s and 1990s who was crucial to the 1990 World Cup win. He scored in the semi-final against England, which West Germany eventually won on penalties. And his 85th minute penalty decided the final in Rome against Argentina. Winning the World Cup brought a wave of national celebrations across Germany, which was in the process of reunification after the fall of the Berlin Wall the year before. He went on to play a total of 86 international games for West Germany and unified Germany. At club level, Briem won the German title twice, once with Bayern in 1987 and once in Kaiserslautern's improbable run to the championship in 1998. In its first season since promotion. He also won the Italian Serie A with Inter in 1989. AP/Reuters. Sports content to make you think. Or allow you not to. A newsletter delivered each Friday. Posted the 20th of February, 202,420, February 2024 to 20th February 2024 at Moldova says Russia illegally printed ballots for election in separatist region ABC News. In short, Moldova says Russia printed ballots illegally in the separatist region of Transnistria ahead of the Russian presidential election. Moldovan officials summoned the Russian ambassador over a decision to open 6 polling stations in Transnistria, in violation of an agreement that allowed 1 station in the Moldovan capital. What's next? Russian citizens will vote in a presidential election, in which current President Vladimir Putin is certain to win, from March 15 to 17. A senior official in ex-Soviet Moldova says Moscow is breaking laws by printing ballot papers in the separatist region of Transnistria ahead of this week's Russian presidential election. Moldova's pro-European authorities have already summoned the Russian ambassador to complain about a decision to open 6 polling stations in the pro-Russian enclave. The central government said the move broke an agreement to allow voting only at a single polling station at the Russian embassy in the Moldovan capital, Chisinau. The ambassador rejected the complaint as unfounded, telling reporters Russia was simply enabling some 250,000 Russian nationals in Moldova to vote, many of them in the separatist region. These ballots were more than likely printed right there in Transnistria, to avoid taking them through a border crossing, Deputy Prime Minister Oleg Serebryan said before a government meeting on Wednesday. It is hard to say how they would have been brought over a border. Moldova's borders are controlled and there is no way of legally bringing them in or taking them out. From March 15 to 17, Russians vote in a presidential election, in which incumbent Vladimir Putin is certain to win against 3 challengers, none of whom criticize him. Moldova's pro-European president, Maya Sandu, has denounced Moscow's invasion of Ukraine and accuses the Kremlin of plotting to unseat her. Russia says Ms. Sandu promotes Russophobia. Transnistria split from Moldova as the Soviet Union was collapsing and has remained on the country's eastern border with Ukraine for more than 30 years with a minimum of turmoil. It has no international recognition and depends heavily on Russian help. Some 1,500 Russian peacekeepers remain in place. Tension has risen between authorities and the region since Moldova imposed customs duties on goods entering and leaving Transnistria as part of its drive to join the European Union. Mr. Serebrian, who is responsible for reintegrating the region, said printing the ballots in Transnistria was intended to show Moldova that the region had no regard for national laws. What is important here is holding the electoral process itself and not whether the ballots are to be taken in or out of Russia, he said. When Russia last held parliamentary elections, in 2021, Russian officials opened 24 polling stations in Transnistria without permission from the country's authorities. Reuters posted 7 hours ago 14th March 2024 at 5:17 p.m. Has Russia been planning a coup in Ukraine's neighbor, Moldova? Here's what we know. ABC News. Russia has been accused of plotting a campaign of sabotage to overthrow the government of Ukraine's neighbor, Moldova. Key points. Moldova's president has echoed claims made by Volodymyr Zelensky that Russia is plotting to overthrow its government. The Moldovan claims came just days after the country's prime minister resigned in part due to an ongoing energy crisis. Moldova is a former Soviet state that is seeking to improve its ties with the West and join the European Union. Details of the alleged plot were revealed by Moldova's President Maya Sandu in the capital, Chisinau, on Monday. The briefing came a week after Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky said his country had intercepted plans by Russian secret services to destroy Moldova. Claims that were later supported by Moldovan intelligence officials. It also came days after Moldova's pro-Western prime minister resigned on Friday, following months of political turmoil caused by skyrocketing energy costs and other crises. Ms. Sandu said Russia's plans allegedly involve using external saboteurs to put the nation at the disposal of Russia and derail its aspirations to one day join the European Union. There are concerns that Russia is attempting to use the landlocked country in its war against Ukraine. What is Russia accused of doing? Ms. Sandu told reporters that Russia's plan involved the use of sabotage, with military training, camouflaged in civilian clothes, to stage attacks, including on state buildings, and take hostages. The overthrow of the country's government and the installation of a puppet regime. An alliance between criminal gangs and two Moldovan oligarchs are currently in exile. Both men last year were sanctioned by the US and the UK. The president said the country's security and intelligence services, working with police, had foiled several cases of organized criminal elements and stopped attempts at violence late last year. What has the Kremlin said? On Tuesday, Russia's foreign ministry rejected Ms. Sandu's allegations, calling them completely unfounded and unsubstantiated. A statement from the ministry blamed Ukraine for stirring tensions between Russia and Moldova, saying Kyiv was trying to draw Moldova into a tough confrontation with Russia. Read more on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. How has the war in Ukraine affected Moldova? Since Russia invaded Ukraine nearly a year ago, Moldova, a former Soviet republic of about 2,600,000 people to Ukraine's southwest, has sought to forge closer ties with its Western partners. It was granted air candidate status last June, on the same day as Ukraine. But over the past year, the country has faced a string of problems. A severe energy crisis, after Moscow dramatically reduced gas supplies. Skyrocketing inflation. Several incidents in recent months involving missile have traversed its skies, and debris that has been found on its territory. Moldova's pro-Western Prime Minister Natalia Gavrilita resigned on Friday in the wake of those crises. Having endured months of street protests organized by the party of exiled opposition politician Ilan Shaw. Defense advisor Doran Racine has been nominated by MS Sandu to become the next prime minister, and he is expected to win parliamentary approval. He says he plans to continue to pursue membership of the European Union for Moldova. What are Moldova's ties to Moscow? Moldova was once part of the Soviet Union, before declaring its independence in 1991. It is one of Europe's poorest countries, with a population of about 2,600,000 people. The country has lurched from one political crisis to another, often caught in limbo between pro-Russian and pro-Western sentiments. In recent years, Moldova has seen widespread disillusionment with post-Soviet politics, and an exodus of hundreds of thousands of its citizens seeking a better life abroad. In 1990, a separatist war broke out in its eastern region of Transnistria, which borders Ukraine. A 1992 ceasefire deal saw a contingent of Russian troops stationed in Transnistria as nominal peacekeepers. Since then, the region has insisted it is not part of Moldova, and most of its 470,000 people speak Russian. Although residents identify themselves as ethnically Moldovan, Ukrainian or Russian. What happens next? MS Sandu vowed, the Kremlin's attempts to bring violence to our country will not succeed. She is pushing Moldova's parliament to pass new laws to give authorities the necessary tools to combat more effectively the risks to the country's security. Considering the plans were intercepted and announced by Mr. Zelensky last week, political scientist Kostin Chobanu, from the Royal Holloway University of London, says it is likely there has been huge pressure on Moldovan authorities to explain further. He says MS Sandu going public could also be a preemptive bid to thwart Russia's attempts to destabilize Moldova. In the same way Western officials called out the Kremlin's war plans before its invasion of Ukraine. Moldovan authorities also confirmed that another missile from the war in Ukraine flew through its airspace on Friday. A State Department official later that day said Washington had no indication of a direct military threat by Russia to Moldova. But the White House's national security spokesperson on Monday called reports of the alleged plot to overthrow the government deeply concerning. ABC/APA/Reuters. Complaint filed to Human Rights Commission against or Child Protection Department, ABC News. In short, Shine Lawyers alleges was Department of Communities has been discriminatory in its removal of First Nations children from their families. Lisa Asterisk was put into care at the age of 6 and said history repeated when her 6-week-old daughter was taken from her. What's next? Complaints that are expected to lead to class actions are being filed in War, NSW, Victoria and SAR. A law firm has lodged a complaint with the Australian Human Rights Commissioner HC against Western Australia's Department of Communities over the allegedly discriminatory removal of First Nations children from their families. It is the second of 4 complaints filed against state government child protection departments, and Shine Lawyers is claiming that widespread racial discrimination has led to the unlawful and unjust removal of Indigenous children into state care. Shine Lawyers also says government departments have failed to reunify these children with their families. First Nations woman Lisa Asterisk was removed from her family when she was 6 and lived in at least 10 different foster homes. I felt like the Department of Child Protection destroyed everything that I could have had with my family, she said. Lisa said she lost connection with her mum and cried for her every day when she was sent to live 600 kilometers away. I still cry for them, she said. I still miss them and I still don't get it back. I never get the love back. Now 20, Lisa said she relived her childhood trauma when her 6-week-old daughter was taken from her and placed into care. Since I lost my connection with my mother, I don't want to lose it with my daughter, she said. Lisa does not want her baby growing up thinking that she is not loved. I never got a chance to love her before they decided to take her away from me, she said. We're seeing a real failure. First Nations children in war are 19.1 times more likely than non-Aboriginal children to be removed from their families, according to the 2023 Family Matters report card. Shine Lawyers Special Counsel Caitlin Wilson said despite legislative intervention, inquiries, policies and reports, and the fact that these statistics have been reported for years, the overrepresentation of Indigenous children in the child protection system had not decreased. Sadly, Western Australia has the highest overrepresentation rate in the country, Ms. Wilson said. We're seeing a real failure when someone is identified early on during their pregnancy. A failure of the department to wrap support around that person and help them with housing issues or domestic violence, substance disorders, whatever it might be. Instead, they're removing the child at birth, and it's too late for anyone to do anything at that stage. The complaint in War follows one in New South Wales in January, and class actions are set to be launched against government departments in 4 states, including South Australia and Victoria. Support available, Minister says. One Minister for Child Protection Sabine Winton said she could not comment specifically on the case in the OHC, but she was proud of her department's work. Aboriginal children are overrepresented in the out-of-home care system. There's absolutely no doubt of that, she said. We are working hand in glove with the federal government to meet our national commitments to closing the gap. Ms. Winton said recent changes in the out-of-home care system showed the direction the department was moving in. We now have 16 organizations who support young children in care. Of those, 6 are now Aboriginal-controlled organizations, she said. This time last year, there was only one Aboriginal-controlled organization. I think therein lies the key, working more and more closely with Aboriginal people, listening to their solutions and backing them in. A Department of Communities spokesperson said it was inappropriate to comment on any matter before the OHC, but said the agency did not tolerate racism in any form. Get our local newsletter, delivered free each Thursday.
Meanwhile, in California, it's Victoria Orphan at Caltech, and she's enraptured by the tiny creatures down there, who, though small, dominate the air we breathe and also our weather. How deep do you go to find your micro?
A group of 7 people who were stranded in Western Australia's flooded outback have been rescued. The 4 children and 3 elderly adults left Kalgoorlie-Boulder on Sunday to drive to the remote community of Junjunjara in the state's far east. But the region has been hit by some of the worst floods in living memory, and they never arrived. So a search was launched in the vast flood-affected area. They were spotted with their bogged vehicle on Wednesday, and a break in the poor weather allowed authorities to send a rescue helicopter on Thursday. Goldfields Esperance District Police Inspector Mick Kelly says they've been taken to hospital for assessment, but appear to be in good spirits.
It's devastating when people find themselves in a situation where they're bogged, the remoteness, the lack of connectivity, the isolation, the amount of rain that's fallen in that area has been astronomical. And until you saw the photo with the bonnet up and everyone waving, it is, as I said, one of the happiest moments for myself, for the group, because it's just brilliant to bring these people home and eventually return them back to their own community.
And because of the conditions, a helicopter had to be used for the rescue.
Yeah, the rescue, due to the remoteness, was what we would call a hot landing. The surface there was still quite wet from the recent rain, and that enables a spotter to come out of the helicopter and then individually secure the community members inside the helicopter and then pull them out by evacuating and coming back here.
The group went missing at a time of widespread flooding in WA. If you're in an affected area, you can tune into your local ABC radio station or the ABC Listen app for the latest updates, warnings.
Australia won't follow the United States in banning the social media platform TikTok. TikTok is banned on all Australian government devices over fears of foreign interference, but Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says there were no plans for a nationwide ban.
We're independent. We don't follow other countries. What we do is we make decisions based on our security assessments.
The United States House of Representatives has passed a bill that could see TikTok banned in the US. Both Democrats and Republicans say they're nervous the Chinese owner of the video platform could pass on user data to the Chinese government. Outside Congress, influencers bussed in by the video platform say it risks destroying their livelihood.
I'm here because I'm a disability advocate, and TikTok changed my life and so many others within the disability community.
TikTok has allowed my dreams that I used to have as a child to come true.
It completely changed my life. I went from literally sleeping in my truck to living in a penthouse to now employing people.
TikTok says more than 170 million Americans use the platform. In Australia, there are more than 8 million active users. Sam Kelly is a managing partner at Hello Social and deputy chair of the Australian Influencer Marketing Council.
As social media practitioners, we've seen a number of flare-ups of these sorts of headlines develop both here locally and out of the US and other regions, in fact, for the last 5 or 6 years. I think governments are on the scramble to keep up with, I guess, the scale and complexity of social media. So I think, look, it's something we are all watching with interest, but the industry will be strong. And if things were to change, we'd just see a shift back to some of those other platforms and channels.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry says the US has never found evidence that TikTok threatens US national security, and a ban would damage the international economic order.
ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music.
Rematch for the US president back. In fact, for many around the world, his departure was a sigh of relief. But here we are. Today, the Trump versus Biden rematch for the US presidency that many...
ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news.
Costs. There are trade-offs that need to be made, and all technologies have their challenges.
Yeah, sure. Of course, nuclear power plants do operate around the world and they're completely safe. The United States has heaps of plants powering tens of millions of homes, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. There's roughly about just over 30 countries across the world have operating nuclear plants. So in the United States, it's just under 20% of their electricity comes from nuclear. But in other countries, France famously, 65% of their power comes from nuclear. In a lot of those countries, it's less than 30% of their total electricity generation.
And we, as Australians, did give new...
Would you like... Lieutenant Colonel Jack Antle. Antle was a veteran of the Boer War and showed much promise, although he tended towards the reckless but glorious action. This would not bode well for his brigade. Unfortunately, his abrasive nature had inhibited his rise through the ranks, and he appeared somewhat embittered by this. By the time 1915 rocked around, he was set in his ways. He tended to bully his subordinates into submission, so much so that he became known as Bull Antle, and he went about his soldiering in a mechanical, by-the-book kind of way. He wasn't prone to adapting to the conditions. This would also not bode well for his brigade. The neck was a narrow saddle of land which connected Russell's Top to Baby 700. It was about 50 metres across, so about the length of an Olympic swimming pool. The Turks had attacked down this piece of land on the 30th of June, only a month or so beforehand, and had been slaughtered. Now the 8th and 10th Light Horse were expected to attack up this same piece of ground. It was so narrow, in fact, that not only could the two attacking regiments not go forward at the same time, each regiment was unable to go forward in its entirety at the same time. The front only allowed 150 men to attack at any one time. This meant the attack would need to be carried out by 4 separate waves of troops. I'll only give a brief outline of the plan, because really the plan lasted about a nanosecond after the first whistle was blown. The first wave, from the 8th Regiment, would rush forward and seize the trenches with bayonets and bombs. The second would sweep on past those trenches and take the next line of trenches at the base of Baby 700. The third would then push even further, and the fourth would bring forward the picks and shovels in order to dig in on their newly won positions. The first wave would be preceded by a strong artillery barrage, which it hoped would give the Turkish defenders a few headaches and make them a bit groggy and unable to respond as the Victorians rushed forward. It sounds simple enough, but the problem is, all those involved in the planning, mainly Hughes, Antle and the overall commander, General Godley, didn't really put much more thought into it than that. Godley had been ordered to take the trenches. He ordered Hughes, who in turn ordered Antle. Each of these men were resolutely stuck in the old world. They felt this whole thing could be taken at the point of the bayonet. The troops were actually forbidden to have their rifles loaded. Just let that sink in for a minute. What difference would it have made if they had a round up the spout and 5 in the magazine? There'd still be nice shiny bayonets flashing around to provide that old school spectacle, but at least the men would be able to fire at the Turks if the need arose. Dash and determination was what would win the day for them, according to Antle in his message to the troops. For their part, the men were keen. They'd never been in a big attack before. They'd missed out on the scenes of slaughter during the landings, the Turkish attacks in May and again in June. They had no real idea of what they were in for. And so, in the way of naive young blokes, they were looking forward to it, at least outwardly. Many actually had illnesses and minor wounds which would have precluded them from participating. And so, in the wee small hours of the 7th of August, the men shivered in their trenches, waiting. A tot of rum at around 3 a.m. warmed them up a bit and probably gave some of the younger ones a bit of Dutch courage. Personal items were to be left behind and the men would carry 200 rounds, none in the rifle, remember, a water bottle, a field dressing, 2 empty sandbags and a field dressing. Other equipment such as wire cutters, periscopes, scaling ladders, etc. were to be shared out among them. Each line would carry 4 red and yellow marker flags which would be thrust into the ground to indicate that each trench had been taken. These markers would play their own part in what was coming. The barrage opened up, and it sounded like it meant business. Ben reckoned it was probably the heaviest he'd heard up to that point. It sounded good, threw up lots of dust, but in reality, it wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. The heavy stuff, normally fired from battleships offshore, couldn't be used due to the closeness of the trenches. The field artillery pieces couldn't really smash trenches, nor could they really achieve sufficient trajectory to lob shells into the first trenches. The dust may have been of some assistance to conceal the advancing troops, had it still been hanging around at the time the first wave charged. But for reasons which have remained a mystery ever since, the artillery stopped 7 minutes prior to the hopover at 4:30 a.m. It was probably something as simple as poor synchronisation of watches. Not that the reason really matters. Whatever the reason was, the light horsemen were now on the path to destruction. The Turks made good use of the delay, packing themselves too deep into the trench, with the rear rank pushing their rifle muzzles between those in front. Machine gunners in the hills and to each flank got themselves ready, and the light horsemen waited. One later wrote home to his mother stating that at this point they knew they were all doomed. It has been a constant mystery to me, having established that some kind of faux pas had occurred, why didn't somebody say, "Oh bugger, there's been a mix-up. How about getting those guns to give another 5 minutes and then we'll all go when they're done?" It would seem the logical thing to do. But as I said before, Jack Antle, who is now basically running this part of the show, was a man who did things by the book, as ordered. No change of plan was considered. So despite all the indications that this wasn't going to go well, Antle ordered Lieutenant Colonel Alexander White of the 8th Light Horse to charge at 4:30 a.m. sharp. Knowing exactly what was about to happen, White decided to lead the first wave himself. Probably not the wisest course of action from a military standpoint, as the commander should probably stay alive to conduct the rest of the fight. But you've got to admire the bloke. He wasn't going to send his troops to their deaths without sharing the risk himself. He said a curt goodbye to Antle and took his place in the line. Along with the men of the first wave, White stood and waited those painfully long couple of minutes, looking down at his watch as the second hand made its way around the face. At exactly 4:30 a.m. he yelled, "Go," and all hell broke loose. Brave Lieutenant Colonel White advanced a grand total of about 10 yards before he was mown down. Most of his troops didn't even get that far. As soon as the first heads showed above the parapet, the Turkish machine guns opened fire. Many men fell back into the trench, dead or wounded. Those who did make it into the open were wiped out within 30 seconds. One survivor, Sergeant Cliff Pinnock, described his charge. "I was in the first line to advance, and we did not get 10 yards. Everyone fell like lumps of meat. All your pals that have been with you for months and months, blown and shot out of all recognition. I got mine shortly after I got over the bank. and it felt like a 1,000,000-ton hammer falling on my shoulder. However, I managed to crawl back and got it temporarily fixed up till they carried me to the base hospital. I was awfully lucky as the bullet went in just below the shoulder blade, round about my throat, and came out just a tiny way from my spine, very low down in the back. It was simply murder." End quote. The firing from the Turkish trenches was so loud that even the men fighting at Lone Pine had to shout to be heard over it. Bean called it one continuous roaring tempest. But a marker flag had made it all the way into the Turkish trench. As one observer stated, all it signified was that someone, ever briefly, had beaten the odds. It was evidence of grit and luck, not occupation. And that's where the attack at the neck should have stopped. At Quinn's Post at around the same time, a similar charge was made, with the first wave being wiped out. The commanders there conferred with Harry Chauvel in overall command of the Light Horse, and the following waves were cancelled. Maybe if White had decided not to go with the first wave, he could have influenced his superiors in the same way. But unfortunately, he was now lying dead in no man's land. At the neck, in precise accordance with the plan, the second wave poured over the top exactly 2 minutes after the first wave. Those men got no further than the first wave had. In 2.5 minutes, the 8th Light Horse Regiment had been destroyed. You can hardly imagine then what the troops of the 10th Light Horse would have been thinking as they filed into the trenches. The dead and wounded of the 8th were lying there, the trench walls splattered with their blood. The cries and moans of the wounded would have been coming in from no man's land, and the 10th knew that they too would soon be lying out there. Or would they? Colonel Brazier of the 10th had seen the carnage of the 8th. He knew it was pointless, so he contacted Antle. Even at the best of times, these two men despised each other. And now, from Antle's perspective, here's this subordinate officer telling him that the attack is pointless. But the plan said the third wave must go. And, as we know, Antle didn't change plans. And by God, a marker flag had been seen in the Turkish trench. So obviously it was possible to get there. And so he shouted those prophetic words at Brazier. Push on. Brazier returned to the trench and told his men that he was sorry, but the order was to go. Trooper Harold Rush turned to his mate and said, "Goodbye, Cobber. God bless you." If you're ever visiting the Gallipoli Peninsula, check out Trooper Rush's grave. Those were his last words and are forever etched onto his tombstone. At 4:45, in Bean's words, the 10th went forward to meet death instantly. Just like the first two waves, the third wave was destroyed within seconds. Major Todd of the 10th went to ground in no man's land. He managed to scribble a message on a piece of paper, which he somehow managed to get back to Brazier in the trench. Brazier took that message to Antle, but the old bull wouldn't listen. He again told Brazier to push on. Brazier then tracked down Hughes, the bloke who was actually in charge, and told him the situation. Hughes suggested changing the point of attack down Bully Beef Sap, but even that would be pointless. What were 150 men going to achieve, even if they could make it into the Turkish trenches? But the debate is pointless, because while Brazier was making his attempt to call off the fourth wave, for reasons which have never been discovered, the troops on the right of the fourth wave charged, without orders. Major Scott knew that Brazier was trying to halt the slaughter, but seeing their mates on the right go over, many others followed, and soon the fourth wave added to the pile of corpses. And so the madness at the neck ended. The lucky ones had been wounded while getting out of the trench and fell back in, or were able to crawl back a short distance. They would have been quickly treated and sent on to the aid posts. The next luckiest were those who were killed outright. Their suffering was over. But for many, the unluckiest of all, were those who were wounded and fell in no man's land. As the sun rose higher into the sky, the temperature rose, and those wounded men drank the last of their water, and then baked all day under the hot sun. Bean recalled, "At first, here and there, a man raised his arm to the sky or tried to drink from his water bottle. But as soon as the sun of that burning day climbed higher, such movement ceased. Over the whole summit, the figures lay still, quivering in the heat." The attack at the neck raises so many questions, but for me, the one that always gets me is why? Why did the men in the second, third and fourth waves go when they knew it was near certain death? Sure, there were orders, and soldiers follow orders, but they also have a survival instinct. Not a single man was reported as refusing to go over. The best I can figure is that either their mates were going, so they were going to go as well. And also, maybe they thought that sacrificing themselves here would ensure that the Turks in front of them wouldn't be deployed elsewhere and the overall offensive would have a better chance. Who knows? The 8th Regiment lost 234 out of the 300 men who charged. 154 of those were killed. The 10th lost 138 with 80 killed. And not a single inch of ground was taken. And their sacrifice made not a schmick of difference to the overall August offensive. And so with that, we'll move on to the last major piece of the fight, the attempt to seize Chunuk. You remember that last episode we left Brigadier Johnson, Major Temperley and Colonel Malone and his New Zealanders resting after their exertions of the night of the 6th and 7th of August. Their objective was to take Chunuk, but it was supposed to have been in their hands before sunrise on the 7th. But the troops were knackered after a long haul up the slopes overnight. They decided not to attack that day, but Godley ordered them to. Temperley knew this would be a bad idea, now that the sun was up and the Turks could see their every move. Johnson should have ordered his troops to attack the moment they reached their positions, but instead he had waited and waited for other troops which didn't show up. With the cover of darkness gone, Temperley tried to convince Johnson to ignore Godley's order, but Johnson wasn't that sort of soldier. He was ordered to attack, and so he was going to attack. Simple as that. Between their current location, known as the Apex, and their objective, Chunuk, was about 500 yards. The men would need to negotiate Rhododendron Ridge, which at its narrowest point would only allow about 100 men to attack at any one time, descend a small saddle which came up to a point known as the Pinnacle, and then cover the final 300 yards, all under the observation of the Turkish defenders. The Auckland Battalion was to lead the attack. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Young, had gone forward to have a bit of a squiz while they were waiting the order from Godley. Almost as soon as he poked his head above ground, he was fired upon. But he managed to have a bit of a look around. He knew it was an impossible task, and he told Johnson so. Young wanted to wait until night. Johnson said no. So the Aucklanders went. It was almost as brutal and tragic as the light horse at the neck. They were mown down. As Temperley said, the leading platoon was simply devastated. About 300 Aucklanders were left out in the open, with only about 100 reaching the Pinnacle, and there was still another 300 yards to go. Johnson had his blood up by this stage. You'd reckon the sight of an entire regiment being almost destroyed would give a commander a bit of a pause. But no, he was back there at the Apex cheering his men on. He turned to Malone and ordered him to take his Wellingtons forward. Malone was made of sterner stuff than Young. He simply refused. There was a bit of a yelling match between Johnson and Malone, and when some of the Wellingtons moved forward to take their positions for the attack, Malone ordered them to stop where they were. He's reported to have told Johnson, "We are not taking orders from you people. Wellington is not going up there. My men are not going to commit suicide." End quote. He stated he would take any punishment handed down. Now, it's not very often in military circles where a colonel tells a brigadier to get stuffed and comes out on the top of the argument. It gives a pretty good indication of the strength of Malone's character that it was Johnson who backed down. He sent a message to Godley stating that the attack had failed, and Godley gave permission for the remaining troops to remain in place and have another crack in the dark. 2 new army battalions were sent to reinforce the Kiwis, the 7th Gloucesters and the 8th Welsh Pioneers. Johnson planned the attack for 4:14 the following morning, with the Wellingtons and the Gloucesters leading. The attack on Chunuk was halted for the day. Now, during that day, Monash was still trying to find his way through the gullies, and the British at Suvla were still doing not a great deal. But they both had such little impact, one way or the other, on the offensive, so I won't bother wasting time describing their endeavours. Just be aware that during the 7th, while the Kiwis waited in front of Chunuk, there were other manoeuvrings going on. And of course, the fighting at Lone Pine was really just ramping up. At about 3 a.m. on the 8th of August, Colonel Malone woke to the sounds of artillery wishing the Turkish defenders on Chunuk a good morning. He gave his batman a letter to post to his wife should he be killed, and then said goodbye. At precisely 4:15 a.m, he led his troops forward from the Apex to the Pinnacle, trying not to step on the dead from the Aucklanders, and then pushed on up to the summit. They did all this without a single shot being fired at them. They arrived at the Turkish trenches to see just one machine gun, manned by a soldier who appeared to be about 70. He reached for his rifle, and so he was shot. That, and killing 2 sentries who threw bombs, was the only fighting in the taking of Chunuk. The ground at the summit was hard and rocky, and so the Turks were unable to dig deep trenches. So when the barrage came down, they simply moved back down the reverse slope and allowed the New Zealanders to move in. As the sun rose, Malone caught a glimpse of what this whole campaign was about, the shining sliver of water known as the Dardanelles Strait. He's one of a select few Allied soldiers who ever got to see this vista. He didn't have time to sit and admire the view, though. He soon realised why the Turks had decided not to stay in the trenches. This place was going to be hard to defend. Not only was the ground hard, but what looked like a single peak from down on the beaches proved to actually be two smaller peaks with a saddle between them. So really they hadn't seized the entirety of the summit. And to add to Malone's problems, the position was open to Turkish fire from Battleship Hill and Sazli Deer. They were actually being shot at from the rear. Sazli Deer should have been already taken, as should Hill 971. The Kiwis were in for a rough time. There's been much conjecture ever since that day as to where Malone sited his trenches and whether they had any effect on the events. But in my personal, uneducated opinion, the location of the trenches is a moot point. Wherever he sited them, I reckon the result would have been the same, so I won't bore you with the details of that debate. By 5 a.m, the Turks were beginning to make things difficult. Snipers from in front and behind were picking off the Wellingtons almost at will. The ground was too hard to dig down very far, leaving the men largely exposed. The Gloucesters, who had come in on Malone's left, seemed to have decided that they'd rather be anywhere else at that point in time, and they broke. An hour and a half later, and the fighting was on in earnest. After being released from a POW camp in 1919, Private Reginald Davis recalled, "A Taranaki man named Surgener was the only man left firing besides myself. Private Surgener was hit in the head somewhere. They kept on firing with his face streaming with blood until he got another hit in the head, which dazed him for a time and knocked him back into the trench. This time I thought he was killed, but he partly came to soon after and loaded rifles for me to fire. At that time, I was using 3 rifles and each was burning hot." End quote. The Turks soon reached Davis's and Surgeon's position, and after a brief struggle where Davis received a bayonet wound to the arm, both men were taken prisoner and spent the next 3 years as POWs. While this fight was developing, Johnson and Temperley were back at the Pinnacle, in relative safety. One officer, Captain Ernest Harston, tried to make it back to the Pinnacle to bring forward reinforcements. He came across a signaller on the way and so phoned Johnson. He said that he had the greatest difficulty in convincing Johnson that the casualties on the summit were heavy. You would have to think at this point that Johnson must have been losing the plot. All around him and in front of him, all the way to the summit, the ground was strewn with dead and wounded men. And yet, apparently, he didn't think Malone was suffering heavy casualties. Templey did say at some point later in the day that Johnson was no longer in a condition to exercise command effectively. You can make a pretty good argument that Johnson had not been in a condition to command effectively since the whole thing started. Anyway, on the right of the Wellington's position, the troops had managed to capture a trench on the downhill side. As the Turks moved forward over the crest, the Kiwis' first glimpse was of their heads. As Private Nicholson said, heads were our target. The Turks came on and soon the battle devolved into hand-to-hand fighting. Private Nicholson described it. "I don't remember any charges. It was all stand and defend with the bayonet. Just a mad whirl. In the back of my head I could hear the words, 'Get the bastard before he gets you. Get him or he'll get you.' I don't remember bayonets going in. Perhaps I shut my eyes. I don't know who I killed and who I didn't. The Turks were heaving bombs at us too. It was hot, hard and thirsty. It's only when your tongue actually rattles in your mouth that you can say you're thirsty. That's no fable, actually rattling around in your mouth. We stripped off our tunics and we were fighting in singlets and in the buff. The Turks were the same. Soon it was so you could only identify a Turk by his hat, his whiskers and his swarthy complexion." End quote. You get the idea. Soon the trenches were so full of dead that the living had no choice but to stand on them. The ground all across the summit was now a dullish red-brown from all the blood that was soaking in. And it wasn't much better for the Turks either. One Turkish soldier stated, "All the officers are killed or wounded. I do not even know where I am. I cannot see anything by observation. I request in the name of safety of the nation that an officer be appointed who knows the area well." End quote. The reason this man, and presumably his comrades, didn't know where he was is because they had been rushed up to the area from Cape Helles. If you remember from the first episode of this series, An Allied attack had been made at Helles, allegedly for the purposes of keeping Turkish troops down there. Obviously, that ploy had failed dismally. Fortunately for the Turks, one man did arrive on the scene who knew what needed to be done. It was the same man who had played a large part in halting the landing back in April, none other than Mustafa Kemal. He contacted von Sanders, Commander-in-Chief on the peninsula, and told him the situation of Chunk Bear was extremely dangerous. The conversation went something like this. Kemal, there is one moment left. If we lose that moment, we are faced with a general catastrophe. Von Sanders, what should be done? Kemal, the only remedy is to put all the available troops under my command. Von Sanders, won't that be too many? Kemal, it will be too few. So late in the evening on the 8th of August, Kemal was given command of all Turkish forces from Suvla to Sari Bear on the southernmost point of Anzac, and the Kiwis' fates were sealed. Throughout the day, Malone was moving about among his men, offering little bits of encouragement, but the fighting was hard and desperate and the casualties just kept piling up. He led one bayonet charge, and a bullet struck his bayonet, bending it. Malone decided that it must be a lucky bayonet, and so he kept it on him. But at 5 p.m, Malone's luck ran out. It wasn't a Turkish bomb, bullet or bayonet that got him. It was a poorly aimed shrapnel burst from one of his own supporting warships. An officer who was present said that he heard the swish of the shrapnel and saw Malone collapse into the arms of another officer. He was more than likely dead before he touched the ground. Malone was possibly the best battalion commander the Kiwis had on Gallipoli. He had fought bravely and cleverly and had led them from the front and kept his troops fighting. But for his actions on Chunk Bear, he received no commendation. Nothing. Nada. Not a sausage. Maybe his argument with Johnson earlier in the day had something to do with it. The battle continued to rage. One more death was never going to make it stop, no matter how courageous the man had been. But as darkness came on, the fighting died down. 760 Wellingtons had gone into the battle that morning. As the sun set, only 2 officers and 47 men were still unwounded. The Welsh, during their part in the fight, had lost 417 men, and the Gloucesters 350, including every officer and sergeant. The wounded were everywhere. But how do you get hundreds of wounded men down a narrow rocky path while fighting is still going on, with a woefully inadequate number of stretcher bearers? Some men took 3 days to be gotten down to the beach. Obviously, many died waiting. But it wasn't over. Godley decided that they needed to attack again the next day. He thought about going for a look himself to see what the situation was, but decided against it. Instead, he sent Brigadier Baldwin, who had reinforced the position, forward to discuss the best way of getting the troops up to the summit with Johnson. Godley reckoned the best way was up Road at Engine Ridge, like Malone had done the previous day. But when Baldwin arrived, Johnson convinced him that there was a better way. That way turned out to be a disaster, which I won't go into here as this episode is starting to get a bit long. On the 10th of August, Kemal ordered his men to charge the small number of New Zealanders still holding on at Chunk Bear. And there's not much more to say from this point. The reinforcement, which Johnson had sent astray, were, at that time, settling into the farm, in no position to provide support to the beleaguered Kiwis. The Turks came over in an avalanche of soldiers and basically swept the Wellingtons away. They then continued to the farm and utterly destroyed Baldwin's force. In that one quick, brutal and unstoppable assault, all hope for success of the August offensive was snuffed out. Without possession of the heights, the outcome of any other fighting around Suvla and Anzac was basically academic. The battle was lost. The only gains had been the small position of Lone Pine and a few hills around Suvla, which on their own were useless if the Turks held Chunuk Bair. The offensive had seen some mind-blowingly courageous fighting and sacrifice, but it had also showed just as much mind-blowing stupidity and failures in leadership. What had started off as just a localised plan from General Birdwood to seize a small, achievable objective had resulted in thousands of casualties for no real gain. From this point on, any small flicker of a chance that the Gallipoli campaign could be brought to a successful conclusion had been shattered. But it would still take nearly 4 more months and hundreds more casualties before the fiasco was finally brought to a close.
Would you like to win a share of 20 million Flybuys points? To enter the draw, just spend $20 on liquor and scan your Flybuys at your local Liquorland from the 21st of February until the 2nd of April 2024. In-store or online. See liquorland.com.au for more. Choose to drink wise. T's and C's apply. ACT permit number TP23/02634. New South Wales permit number NTP/08537. SA permit number T23/2019.
Spending more time.
Of more than 91,500 residents across its 12 suburbs. And while weighing roughly the same as a Tesla Model 3 long-range electric sedan, the Hummer H3, the only Hummer model to have come on sale here in Australia, only sold 1,780 vehicles over a 2-year period and hasn't been available to buy new for 15 years. Data obtained by Drive also shows that just 7 Ram pickups are registered within the Yarra City Council as of December 2023. However, Councillor Jolly also pointed out that the council supported high-rise residential buildings, which inevitably means builders and maintenance contractors who drive utes, as well as there being tradies living in the area who work jobs in the outer suburbs. Almost everyone who owns a home or rents has a tradie come to them at least once, he told the council meeting. We need to ensure our most vulnerable, disadvantaged residents are not disadvantaged by some action that we take here. It was recommended a report be prepared to investigate the ways to make travelling in Yarra's streets more equitable and discourage large and heavy vehicles on Yarra's streets, including by considering proportionate parking fees on a vehicle's size. The motion also suggested adding exemptions for people with disabilities and owners of electric vehicles. If such a caveat were to be included in the proposed parking regulations, this would include vehicles such as the BMW iX electric SUV, which is both larger than the Hummer H3, as well as being more than 300 kilograms heavier. While not currently on sale here in Australia yet, excluding electric vehicles would also mean that the Ford F-150 Lightning pickup, the forthcoming Ram 1500 Rev pickup and the GMC Hummer EV would be theoretically exempt from the parking restrictions, despite the electric Hummer weighing approximately twice as much as a diesel-powered 2024 Land Rover Defender 90. It's going a bit ridiculous, isn't it? Gee whiz. I wonder if it's because they just want to try and get more money out of the patrons. And then they go and donate it to organisation or other to government things if the council believes in it. Like The Voice. Remember a couple of Sydney councils donated quite a bit of money to The Voice which is not really what it's designed to do. That's ratepayers' money, isn't it? Anyway, but there you go. So they're trying now to make it so that if you drive a big vehicle or an SUV or, as I say, a four-door pickup, which is the sort of cars Aussies are buying these days, they're going to charge you more to park and everything. Well, ridiculous. Absolutely. Dear, what's it all coming to? I don't know. 13 12 69 is the number to call if you'd like to say good day. Let us know what's on your mind, Australia.
Wake up with Richard King from 5 a.m.
Minister for International Development in the Pacific, that's Pat Conroy. He's on the line. Good morning.
ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music, and more.
Building muscle has often been seen as a lower priority for people who are focused on trying to get fit.
When you contract skeletal muscle, it also uses something called fatty acids. People really care about cholesterol, but one of the keys to having a good cholesterol level is having healthy skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle at rest actually uses fat. The other thing about healthy skeletal muscle is when you exercise based on
gold. Yeah, I mean, that was a big thing in those days, have a PA. Oh, my God. Yep. And he was in, and we were like, well, yeah, that's good. Yeah, we don't know. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. And then that was the beginning of all of it, really.
Well, yes, and there was, a lot of slog on the way. But when you did eventually hit the big time, you write a few points in the book, Jim, that, everything on the surface seems great. But at home, things weren't so great. The touring was taking toll on your family life. And also you just were starting to feel a bit surreal and disconnected from things. What was happening for you then?
Well, I think this is part of the book is trying to unpack that. I think, really, I think you're just there and you have this desire to run, which I think is a deep down emotional response that adopted people have to things. And I don't want to paint myself as a victim because I'm not. I mean, I don't think that's what it's about. I think it's deeply in the way you're in your nervous system. So I found a lot of it really difficult. I don't think the
ABC Listen.
Is at an event, they'll have a handler who whispers things about the important guests in their ear so they can ask about people's children or their latest, work achievements. And Taylor does the same thing. She'll have somebody, although fans like to think she does it herself, she doesn't. It's her team who will collate information. So when she meets the fans, she'll say, oh my gosh, congratulations on graduating. I saw you had a new boyfriend. Your new haircut looks amazing. And it deepens the connection and leads to this reputation she has of really caring about her fans when it's just really carefully constructed marketing.
What the hell? Is that what the jobs, what they do, the jobs, whatever it is, one comes in, make up of this, get the cameras to do it. Hector, Intermix, Hector, beautiful person, mate.
Yeah, but I tell you what, a politician probably wouldn't send anyone a surprise gift in the mail.
No, but Taylor...
No, then you got to protest harder and protest more quicker and more stronger every day. Protest.
Does. She has been known...
We love you, Hector is fantastic.
To send
We
presents
love you, Hector is fantastic. We love you, Hector is fantastic. Subscribe.
for lots of reasons, but sometimes it seems just because we're a fan, we'll be noticed on social media and they'll receive packages. Sometimes it'll have little messages that say, I saw this and thought of you, and that kind of thing. So it really leads to this level of connection. And
Look what you need, where you need it, what the app, where's the app, how the app, oh, the fuck you too, motherfucker.
they kind of come out of the blue in that I assume a fan will be asked by her team for their address, but they're not sure why. And then a giant box of goodies comes, and it's really unique. She's
Into another planet, how do we colonize into another spaceship, extraterrestrial? Sexy. I love you, Hector.
only celebrity that does anything like that.
That would be hugely if you're a big Taylor Swift fan, and I'm not. It would be a hugely affecting experience.
It would be, and I am a huge Taylor Swift.
I got fucky, they will win the money, cash, cat got your tongue, cunt. Cat got your tongue, mate.
Fan, and even though some of my research does get a bit critical of her marketing tactics, I still would do anything to, get one of those boxes or to be noticed by her, because the way she does it is just so clever. You can't help but kind of be like, oh, but I want to be noticed too.
So how do you get noticed? How do you get picked for
those type of jobs, sexy and magazines, radios, everything.
ABC Listen, podcast. As being a co-creator of value in the economy and not just at best fixing.
Oh, that's what he does. It's his job. That's beautiful. I love you, Hector. I love you, Hector. I love you. Nice, sexy.
Market.
Fight for the power. Fight for the right to beat with the power. Fight for the right. Fight for the power. Fight for the beat to beat with it. I love you so much. You're beautiful. Get down with mine. And DJ, apple.
At best, trying to prove its efficiency with static kind of private sector metrics of cost-benefit analysis. And second, that then really actually requires insourcing that capacity. I cite Ernest Brackett, who was the head of procurement.
I'm punching in. Get it in the house with the new party, the party. You gonna Aborigine win. I love you so crazy.
And for the Apollo program with NASA.
I love you so crazy. Hector is fantastic. I love you.
He said, if we keep outsourcing our knowledge, and that was, already back in the 1960s, we're going to get captured by brochuremanship. They didn't have PowerPoints at the time. So, sexy brochures by companies coming in. So you actually need that internal capacity in order to even know who to work with, which private sector companies to work with, even which consulting companies you might work with, how to write a proper terms of reference, a proper contract. Third, we really need to embed learning into contract evaluation. So, organizations can adapt and need to be able to adapt and be dynamic and so on, but we need to be able to evaluate and assess whether contracts with, say, consulting companies are in fact designed in such a way to allow that organization, whether it's government or business, to become stronger, to become more dynamic, more creative, and eventually not require that consulting arm to be there forever. So much more transparency in terms of contracts at that level, but also transparency in terms of what we were talking about before, disclosing the different types of conflicts of interest, right? So to fully understand how
it will destroy ya, will love ya, will crazy. I love you, Hector. I love you. We have your body. I love you. Checking your hand, moving your hand, checking your hand, moving your hand. DJ, oh, DJ, oh, DJ, oh, DJ, oh. Papareo, papareo. Oh, apareo, It's beautiful. It's good. You have the mind, you can do it, and you're fucking it up, motherfucker. Beautiful. You're making so you have your own app, your own construction, he talks to you. You want it what it does. He loves what it does. Your computer is updated.
Consulting firm's clientele might affect the advice it provides. Consultancy contracts should no longer be able to operate under this complete veil of secrecy. And I guess lastly, really differentiating when the consultancies are on the sideline versus when they're actually doing the work of government.
Yes.
You wouldn't know how to ride a bicycle unless you fell off. So the kind of learning by doing, trial and error is a critical part of learning. So we say that governments need to actually row so that they can steer the ship. It's not about just thinking that at best you're just steering and someone else is kind of doing the machinery of government. As soon as you outsource the machinery, you're actually less able to govern the greatest challenges over time, which I repeat, actually require public, private, third sector organizations to be collaborating together. But what we've witnessed in the last 50 years, I'd say, is the dismantling of the capacity within our government organizations to even be a good partner. I mean, this is the irony, to even be a good partner to these other organizations.
It's a point you've made before, and a good point, I think, to finish. Thank you very much for joining us today. The book is fizzing with ideas. Congratulations, and thanks for joining us on The Money again.
Thanks so much.
Mariana Mazzucato is co-author with Rosie Collington of The Big Con, How the Consulting Industry Weakens Our Businesses, Infantilises Our Governments.
ABC Listen.
Hello, my friends. My name is Ruby, and you are listening to News Time.
Howdy, Ruby. Hi. Hello.
Today's web of stories starts with some spiders who are catching more than just flies. We'll hang loose and surf with the best at big swells, and then travel to the other side of the solar system to hear about a very different kind of ocean. We'll learn.
If a doctor doesn't come soon, I'm going to make some phone calls and report all of you for malpractice.
You have to actually think through what you're doing and perform on your feet in front of this avatar.
Okay, I will wait, but please make sure this doesn't happen again. Thank you for your understanding.
Oh my God, I'm sweating. That is so stressful.
I'll take these off you.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that I'm sweaty and I don't feel like I handled that well. Thankfully, it's not my job. But there are aspiring health professionals who will be dealing with this stuff day in and day out. So what approach should they take? Psychiatrist Carol Barnes says they might have to go against their instincts.
Sometimes we want to avoid people when they're starting to look agitated, and I think what you need to do is be able to approach in a friendly, open manner. And I think sort of always coming back to the fact that you're there to help and you're there to listen.
Students might not know how they'll respond in these scenarios. And Dr. Barnes says it's better to find out in the classroom than on the job.
The more you can kind of induce a bit more of your own anxiety response, I think that's actually better for the education, the actual experience, because you can't do that ethically on the wards or an ED, but you want them to be able to manage and start to recognise their own signals of arousal and what their own response is.
Martin Brown says this program is already being used in classrooms, most recently with a cohort of nursing students.
So we just asked them to have a go and see how they went with Louis. And then we showed them some videos of a 15-year veteran of the ED, a very experienced psychiatric nurse, working with an actor, verbally de-escalating that actor. And then we...
ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news.
Is as high off cat videos. It feels like paying hundreds of millions of dollars for something they actually don't care about is not super up their alley. As millions more than that, which is why Facebook's argument is like, their statistic is 3% of our engagement comes from news content. We'd rather just give that up than pay the question mark millions of dollars.
There's also the thing that they've now seen overseas, that they can shut down news on their services and it's sort of okay for them. So the good example is Canada, right? Canada's done this, haven't
Yeah, for a while now, there has been no news on these platforms in Canada, and it seems to be absolutely business as usual for these meta platforms. They simply don't care. And that's kind of the whole problem with these codes. At the moment, it seems to be governments, trying to champion news, which is a great thing, but coming to these platforms and saying, we have something extremely valuable that you want, and we want you to pay for it, and we're simply finding out that it is not that valuable to these platforms.
There was a situation where, and I'd love to understand this a bit more, where Meta and Google had given money to media organisations, and from that jobs were created. I know the ABC created a bunch of jobs for money from the tech companies. Where does that sit within this arrangement?
So that is actually one of the many flaws of the news media bargaining code, is that there's very little transparency. So the ABC and the Guardian were among the publications to get money from these Meta and Google, but they were the only ones who said, like, hey, I think the ABC said, we're going to hire 60 rural journalists with this money. But actually the media publications were under no obligation to actually explain how that money is used. So the main beneficiaries of it are 9, 7 and News Corp. Theoretically, that money can just go to dividends to shareholders, or like a marketing budget or a new building. There's no actual need for them to show everyone how that money is being spent.
So those deals are coming to an end now? Is that
Google's deals are 5 years, so that would be 2026, and Facebook's years are 3 years, which
Facebook's
is
decided
now.
to
Yeah, basically. Yeah. So they're in two fundamentally different positions, right? Because Google, I don't think anyone can argue Google's business can thrive without surfacing news links, right? Whereas Facebook, I think quite plausibly can say, this is way more fuss than it's worth, especially in an election year. Like, I think the last thing they can be bothered to deal with is another round of, like, you ruined the election. And when engagement is as high off cat videos, it feels like paying hundreds of millions of dollars for something they actually don't care about is not super up their alley.
As painful as it will be for media organisations to not have this, like, cash injection they've had for the last couple of years, certainly from Facebook anyway, maybe it's good that news and tech companies are not entwined together in that way.
Yeah, it's a really tricky thing because I guess it's that ongoing conversation of
And I used AI to kind of build a couple of elements, and then I photoshopped them together and went, can we do a shoot that looks like this? And increasingly for, like, when it comes to photo shoots for, like, producing TV shows and stuff like that, I'm getting producers and directors and graphic designers send me AI versions of myself in frames. Yeah, it's weird. Like, we'd like to shoot you like this, and I'm like, what is that? I'm like, that's what AI thinks you look like, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to have nightmares for a month. So increasingly AI is being used to help the process of shooting things for real or designing things for real. I guess the question is, do we think it will stay there? Is this an example of us putting a line in the sand where you think it will stay there, or is it likely to just take over as the technology improves, do you think?
I think, like most things in the world, it will come to a sort of middle ground. I think that there's a lot of people who don't necessarily care if something's AI. They don't necessarily value the human touch in art. They just want to see the pretty colors, and that's fine. And I think that it's also going to galvanize people who consider themselves to be very...
Live across Adelaide on the...
Fingers in. And so, amazingly, thanks to the lovely Rhino Room being open to our schedules, 3 of those shows opened this week at the Rhino Room.
Otto is with the Australian Traffic Network. How is it today?
Well, not that great, Joe. Got a crash in Torrensville on Hardy's Road near Henley Beach Road. Also Norwood on the Parade near Osmond Terrace, Oaklands Park Diagonal Road near Torrens East Road, Ferreton.
If you've got a hyphenated, obviously 20 to 30k.
Adelaide.
And I is my last name instead of Lavity Sullings. So I have a lot of sympathy for people who get saddled with a hyphenated name. Some of them are lovely though. Some are really, you think, oh gosh, that's special. Sonia and Jules on breakfast today. We're talking about hyphenated names.
The 4 months.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, well, so they are saying at this stage, but the Kings already started to do a few light duties, but anyway, I better get off the air.
No worries. You have a wonderful...
To speak to somebody else.
You have a wonderful weekend if I don't speak to you again.
Good. I might speak to you tomorrow morning.
You never know. Good on you, mate. Okay.
And you have a great weekend too.
Thank you. Cheers, buddy. Bye-bye. 13 12 69 is the number to call if you'd like to say good day. Back with more after this.
Talking Sport, weekdays from 3.
The pressure lays with those.
Mosquitoes can detect the carbon dioxide plume that comes from your breath. So unless at a barbecue you hold your breath and faint, you're going to be excreting carbon dioxide. So that's the first thing. Second thing
I think ticks are the same. I think ticks home in on the carbon dioxide plume. That's how they find you.
That's quite possible. I haven't swatted up on ticks for this particular rash.
Swatted, look at you.
Very good. The other thing is body temperature. So mosquitoes run at a temperature of maybe 28 degrees, but they seem to be tuned to be attracted to a temperature of 37 degrees. So body temperature is the other thing.
The radio in the afternoon.
Body odor. There is a species of mosquito that loves stinky cheese, Limburger cheese. And interestingly, it's a bit controversial because other studies have not shown that, but the bugs that so this is going to put you off stinky cheese for the rest of your life. The bugs that produce this stinky cheese are also the same bugs that cause foot odor.
Right.
Have you ever wondered why your ankles
every occasion. Each one carries the trusted green and gold kangaroo logo, so you can be sure it's genuinely Aussie. Hop to australianmade.com.au/top Aussie and support local while you shop.
Do you suffer from mild arthritis, osteo, and other aches and pains? With its natural organic ingredients, Stiff Sore and Sorry Pain Relief Gel might assist you. Always read the label, use only as directed, and if symptoms persist, see your healthcare professional. Look for Stiff Sore and Sorry Pain Relief Gel at pharmacies and health food stores everywhere. To find the location of your nearest Stiff Sore and Sorry stockers, go to loveoilcollection.com.au or phone Ray on 040 66 71 359.
Cobram Estate is the most awarded Australian extra virgin olive oil made from olives grown in northern Victoria. They're harvested and first cold pressed within 4 to 6 hours to create a premium quality oil.
How do you get the tax or GST tax or any tax, or what's the tax or where's the tax, or lost money, lotto, aeroplane, airports, cowboys, people owning the mine, the gold, taxes.
Or taking home.
Who is taking the taxes? Where are the taxes? How we could blow out or the money go with the taxes?
Brian March will grab you a ticket in the draw. And for every additional 5K you spend, you'll get another ticket. Visit your local Elders branch or elders.com.au for details today. Terms and conditions apply.
This is Radio 2SM.
This is Radio 2SM.
It's a new day, and you're listening to Dave Till Dawn. Call now, 13 12 69, and wake up the world.
Yeah, that's that number, 13 12 69. Yeah, as Lance was saying, a Japanese company's goal to be the first in the country to put a satellite in orbit and offer space courier services has ended in a spectacular fashion when its solid fuel-based rocket exploded shortly after launch on Wednesday. Space One's 18-metre, four-stage solid-fueled Keros, I think it is, rocket exploded seconds after lifting off just after 11:01 a.m., leaving behind a large cloud of smoke, fire, fragments of the rocket, and firefighting waterway sprays near the launch pad on the tip of mountainous Kii Peninsula in western Japan. The company said the flight, which was streamed live, was interrupted after the launch, and it was investigating the situation. There was no immediate indication of what caused the explosion. There were no injuries near the launch pad, and the fire has been extinguished. The governor of local Waccamaw, I think it is, government, told reporters that the company has said that the launch is highly automated and requires roughly a dozen staff at the ground control centre. But they the rocket itself carried an experimental government satellite that can temporarily replace intelligence satellites in orbit if they fall offline. Yeah, but not a good start, but these things happen, don't they? Anyway, I'm sure they'll do it again, and maybe it won't happen next time. Who knows? But we'll find out all about that, no doubt, with Dave Renicky on Sunday night. 13 12 69 is the number to call if you'd like to let us know what's on your mind on this Friday morning. Good morning, Australia.
They went from hundreds of mosquitoes landing on black to one mosquito landing on white.
Is that maybe a camouflage thing? Like, mosquitoes are black, and so are they maybe instinctively looking to camouflage themselves in dark surfaces?
That could be one theory, if we were able to interrogate a mosquito. Another could be that white is not associated with blood.
Okay. If you are a dark-skinned person or a light-skinned person, does that affect how attractive you are to mosquitoes then?
Isn't that...
Rainbow ink, Shakti designers.
drug references with Novocaine.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
but when they ban something,
You just give it a life, don't you?
absolutely, and I guess that's what happened.
You just like me because I'm good in bed. The Skyhawks was on with that.
Oh, thank you. I thought you were offering. No, pub rock credibility, mate. That's what it got. That's really what it got. Don Walker suspected, though, the reason why it wasn't getting played too was a broader unwillingness to come to grips with that failed war in Vietnam. K-San, how high do you reckon it got in the top 40?
See, I'm going to say it never got to number one.
It never got to the top 40.
What?
Yeah. It reached 41 on the national
Is that
charts.
right?
That's all it did.
I can see it wouldn't got to number one. You never even got into the top 40.
Never got into the top 40. Outrageous, isn't it, really?
Was that because of the radio airplay ban? Or?
Didn't get played.
Just didn't get played, I suppose.
But it got a reputation, I guess, by being in those pubs and being played in the pubs. But, I tell you
That's interesting, though. So it had a life outside of radio airplay.
Yeah. Incredible. And Cold Chisel themselves, they got... What a reputation. The band loved equally by local schoolgirls as much as the hardened crims and the punters down in the pubs as well. The band's debut song, its most unusual anthem, really. It has no chorus, but it didn't stop it becoming an iconic Australian anthem.
That is true. It's not. It's a song without a chorus.
Stunning song. We better play it.
Let's play it.
Where is the radio? What happened to it? Jeez, the music, is it? Jesus Christ, man.
Stop it becoming an iconic...
Actually, true.
It's a stunning song. We better play it.
What the hell? Oh, stop it. Unreal, Hector?
Some big names celebrating their birthdays today too, celebrity-wise too. So we'll might jump into the Wayback Machine next hour and find out who those people are that are having a birthday today, celebrity-wise, and also what happened on this day in history, this 15th day of March. Of course, if you're having a birthday, anniversary or anything today, I hope you have a fantastic day too. And, and a reminder too, as I said, the NRL Round 2 with NRL Nations on tonight. It's the Sharks taking on the Bulldogs, and that's live from 8 p.m. tonight, New South Wales Daylight Saving Time from PointsBet Stadium. And the callers will be Jimmy Smith, Tim Manor and Justin Horrow. Hope I pronounced that one right. And then on tomorrow afternoon, Saturday afternoon, round 2 of the AFL Nation Games, and it kicks off at 1 p.m. Again, New South Wales Daylight Saving Time. That'll be Essendon taking on Hawthorn. That's from the MCG. And then straight after that, around about 4...
No, get this one. And here, go this one. And go like this. Para now.
SBS live streams and podcasts are supported by the afterlife.
You can listen to Grave Matters wherever you get your podcasts.
Visit emails of prestigious come to.
You can listen to Grave Matters wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to SBS News in Easy English. I'm Sam Dover. The headmaster of prestigious Sydney school, Cranbrook, has resigned following revelations he continued to employ a teacher that he knew had sent sexually explicit emails to a former female student. The ABC has revealed the emails, which saw the teacher also boasting about looking up girls' skirts during class but said much of the material was too graphic to print. Cranbrook headmaster Nicholas Sampson has reportedly stepped down after an emergency school council meeting was held yesterday. Mr. Sampson was told about the explicit emails in 2015, but the ABC reports the teacher was still working at Cranbrook as of this week. Displaced women living in a camp south of Rafah say there is no celebration of International Women's Day in the Gaza Strip. About 1.5 million people are estimated to be in Rafah, after many fled their homes further north to escape Israel's military assault. Ahmed Zakaut is one of the women living in the displacement camp and says there is nothing left to call woman.
In Palestine, we don't have Women's Day, especially in Gaza. Women have been wiped away. They no longer have an identity here. Before October 7, women here had a good quality of life in their homes. They were secure and happy. They had everything. After October 7, there are no longer any women.
More than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel's assault on Gaza, and local health authorities say about 2/3 of the dead are women and children. Meanwhile, the government has released its second annual Status of Women report card, which shows the gender pay gap is at a record low of 12%, but other serious disparities remain. The report, published on International Women's Day, shows Australia is ranked 26th globally for gender equality, up from 43rd place in 2023's report card. But it also reveals women still do over 9 hours more unpaid work and care than men. And over a quarter of women who recently experienced sexual harassment experienced it at work. And a vigil will be held tonight for Ballarat woman Samantha Murphy, following news a 22-year-old man has been charged with her murder. Police allege Ms. Murphy was killed on the day she went missing, although her body has still not been found. The 51-year-old was last seen leaving her Ballarat East home for a run on the 4th of February. Her husband, Mick Murphy, has told Channel 9 he's grateful for the support he's received in the 5 weeks since her disappearance.
From the word go, it's just been unbelievable. You could not, the generosity and the support from the community has just been just overwhelming. Friends, family, everyone. Like, this is that much respect for Sam and us and the family. Yeah.
And in cricket, Pat Cummins has won the toss and sent the Kiwis into bat as Australia hopes for a clean sweep of their tour of New Zealand in the second test. Christchurch's Hagley Oval hosts the final test and final match of the tour, with play beginning at 11 a.m. Australia leads 1-0 in the series, meaning they have already retained the Trans-Tasman Trophy, a piece of silverware New Zealand haven't held for 3 decades. I'm Sam Dover. This has been SBS News in Easy English.
Why do people want to be at work?
In this bulletin, United States President Joe Biden says invasion of Rafah may be a red line. Trade Minister Don Farrell says Australia would win over tariffs if China Matter returns to the WTO. And in sport, Australia's sport integrity chief says sports leaders need to step up against racism. Good afternoon from the SBS Newsroom. I'm Assam Al-Ghalib. United States President Joe Biden has said Israel's threatened invasion of Rafah would be his red line with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and then immediately backtracked. In an interview with broadcaster MSNBC, Mr. Biden said an Israeli invasion of Rafah, where more than 1 million displaced Palestinians are sheltering, was a red line for him. He also suggested it was unacceptable that Israel has killed more than 30,000 people in the pursuit of Hamas militants. However, he quickly reiterated he would never leave Israel and that the defense of the nation was still critical. Mr. Biden reiterated his call for a 6-week ceasefire for hostage releases and aid delivery and said a ceasefire before the month of Ramadan was still possible. Ramadan begins on or around the 10th of March, and negotiations have stalled. Federal Trade Minister Don Farrell says Australia would win its $1 billion dispute with China over wine tariffs if the matter returned to the World Trade Organization. Beijing slapped sanctions worth $20 billion on Australian products during the height of the diplomatic tensions in 2020. China is now reviewing sanctions on wine under a 5-month process after the Albanese government agreed to suspend a dispute lodged with the WTO. Mr. Farrell has told Sky News that process will come to an end on the 31st of March.
We're now simply waiting for China to complete its processes. I'm hopeful that at the end of that process, China will lift all of its tariffs on Australian wine. But if they don't, then we will continue with our World Trade Organization dispute. And we will win that dispute.
A competitive water skier has died during a race on the Murray River near the border between New South Wales and Victoria. The 42-year-old man was injured around 11 a.m. on Saturday while racing in the Robinvale-Euston 80 race and could not be revived by paramedics. Ski Racing Victoria cancelled the event for Saturday and Sunday. A report is being prepared for the coroner. The incident comes after the death of a man at the Southern 80 water ski race last month, also on the Murray River. Pope Francis says Ukraine should show what he's called the courage of the white flag and negotiate an end to the war with Russia that followed Moscow's full-scale invasion 2 years ago and that has killed tens of thousands. His words came as Ukrainian authorities have said 2 people, including a teenage boy, have been killed in Russian artillery attacks. Russia also reported it had shot down a Ukrainian fighter jet and destroyed a wave of drones over several regions. Russia is gaining momentum on the battlefield, and Ukraine is running low on ammunition, prompting its allies in the West to delicately raise the prospect of sending troops to assist. But Pope Francis has said in an interview that Ukraine should show the white flag of courage and instead seek to negotiate.
Quella parola negoziare.
The word negotiate is a courageous word. When you see that you are defeated, when things are not going well, you have to have the courage to negotiate. One may feel shame, but how many dead will the war end up with? And it will end even worse. One should negotiate in time, find a country that can be a mediator.
Thousands of pro-Palestinian protesters have marched in London, Manchester, and Paris, calling for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war and humanitarian aid for Gaza. In London, the crowds were large enough to more than fill the 1.7-kilometer road between central London and the River Thames. Reverend Jenny McKay attended the rally, which marched towards the U.S. Embassy. And in Tel Aviv, protesters have scuffled with police in what has become known as Hostages Square, calling for the Israeli government to do more to free the 130 hostages still held in Gaza. During their attack on southern Israel on the 7th of October, Hamas killed 1,200 people, including 33 children, and took more than 240 hostage. Israel's retaliatory attack on Gaza has so far killed at least 30,200 people, including 12,000 children, and displaced 85% of the population, which is facing famine due to aid blockages. Ceasefire talks in Cairo have stalled, with hopes for a 40-day truce during Ramadan.
I'm Ruth McHugh-Dillon. Rating an entrance to the mine. The pair were pinned by fallen rocks at the Mount Clear mine on Wednesday afternoon. Remains trapped. I'm Ruth McHugh. Attack on Alexei believed to have occurred at Ballarat in Victoria's goldfield. One man has been freed and another remains trapped after a mine collapse on the outskirts of Ballarat in Victoria's goldfields. The pair were pinned by fallen rocks at the Mount Clear mine on Wednesday afternoon. The incident is believed to have occurred about 3 kilometres underground from the entrance to the mine. Around 25 workers have been brought safely to the surface. Russian President Vladimir Putin has been accused of orchestrating an attack on a close associate of the late Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, in Lithuania. Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda has said the attack on Navalny aide Leonid Volkov was clearly pre-planned and tied in with other provocations against Lithuania, which is a member of NATO and the European Union. Mr. Volkov was attacked with tear gas and a hammer as he arrived home in the Lithuanian city of Vilnius, where he lives in exile.
They're going to attack him with a hammer and all that, you know what I mean? They're going to stuck him with a hammer. Lithuanian, they're going to stuck him, they're going to start like that with a hammer, fucking get in there, get the fucking gloves in and fucking poof, poof, poof. First shot, first in, first fucking dress, fuck, poof, poof. One punch to the head, fucking Russia.
But he says he will keep up his work.
They wanted to make me into a schnitzel with a meat hammer right outside my house in the yard. The attacker hit me 15 times in my leg. Surprisingly, the leg is still in one piece. It's difficult to walk, but apparently the leg is not broken. My arm has been broken instead. The most important thing is we will continue working and we will not surrender. It was another obvious, typical, classic gangster hello from Putin and the gangster
I'm gangster the fuck up and fucker, you get the fuck out, motherfucker. Russia.
Petersburg. Continue working against Putin. That's what needs to be done. Let's go on.
In Gaza, 5 Palestinians have reportedly been killed in an Israeli strike on an UNRWA aid distribution centre in Rafah. One has been freed and another remains trapped after a mine collapse on the outskirts of Ballarat in Victoria's goldfields. The pair were pinned by fallen rocks at the Mount Clear mine on Wednesday afternoon. The incident is believed to have occurred about 3 kilometres underground from the entrance to the mine. Around 25 workers have been brought safely to the surface. Russian President Vladimir Putin has been accused of orchestrating an attack on a close associate of the late Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, in Lithuania. Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda has said the attack on Navalny aide Leonid Volkov was clearly pre-planned and tied in with other provocations against Lithuania, which is a member of NATO and the European Union. Mr. Volkov was attacked with tear gas and a hammer as he arrived home in the Lithuanian city of Vilnius, where he lives in exile. But he says he will keep up his work.
They wanted to make me into a schnitzel with a meat hammer right outside my house in the yard. The attacker hit me 15 times in my leg. Surprisingly, the leg is still in one piece. It's difficult to walk, but apparently the leg is not broken. My arm has been broken instead. The most important thing is we will continue working and we will not surrender. It was another obvious, typical, classic gangster hello from Putin and the gangster Petersburg. Continue working against Putin. That's what needs to be done. Let's go on.
In Gaza, 5 Palestinians have reportedly been killed in an Israeli strike on an UNRWA aid distribution centre in Rafah. The United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees says at least one employee was among the 5 people killed, while 22 others have been injured. The Israeli military says it is investigating what happened in relation to the aid centre. UNRWA employee Sami Abu Salim has expressed shock Israel would target what he called an international institution.
We are in an internationally protected headquarters. How can the occupation planes target a place like this? We are defenseless people. We are here to deliver aid to the displaced.
But obviously a lot will depend on how well some of these big ticket cases are ultimately handled.
And what is he alleged to have done?
So Hashim Tachi is being accused of a whole slew of essentially war crimes and crimes against humanity. During the Kosovo War, he was along with a number of other key individuals, all of whom were key members in the Kosovo Liberation Army, which was the guerrilla army of the Kosovar Albanian community in Kosovo during the 1999 war with the Yugoslav security forces during the Milosevic regime. And there obviously were war crimes that were committed against ethnic Serbs as well as ethnic Roma people during the Kosovo War in conjunction with the much bigger and structural issue, which was obviously the kind of systemic campaign that the
Assessing Australia's climate risks DCSU. Main menu. Or main. Climate change driving climate action, science and innovation so we are ready for the future. Stronger action on climate change. See how the Australian government is committed to taking more ambitious action on climate change. Find out more. Energy building a secure and sustainable energy system for all Australians. Environment improving stewardship and sustainable management of Australia's environment. New nature positive laws, public webinar. Watch our public webinars to learn more about proposed changes to our environment laws. Watch now. Water improving the sustainable management of Australia's water supply for industry, the environment and communities. Parks and heritage managing Australia's iconic national parks, historic places and living landscapes. Great Barrier Reef. Australia is protecting and conserving this World Heritage Area. Find out more. Science and research undertaking research and collecting data to support informed decisions and policies. Our climate is changing. Find out more about how climate science helps Australians with the impacts of climate change. Find out more about USU-led Australia's response to climate change and sustainable energy use, and protect our environment, heritage and water. Online service who do business with you using online platforms. This makes it easier for you to meet your legal requirements. Assessing Australia's climate risks. THEFI's Past Risk Assessment is a national report on how climate change puts what we value at risk, now and in the future. The report identifies 56 nationally significant climate risks facing Australia across 7 of 8 systems of national importance. A subset of 11 priority risks for analysis in a second pass risk assessment to be undertaken this year. Identifying these climate risks will help provide a shared understanding of the most important risks facing the nation from climate change. The first pass assessment of climate risks for the First Nations Values and Knowledges system is underway. This has been delivered by the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water DCSU, in partnership with the Australian Climate Service. The first pass assessment process included engagement with governments, academia, industry, non-government organizations, First Nations peoples from across the nation, adapting to climate risks. To be better prepared for and manage increasing risks arising from climate change, Australia needs to mainstream adaptation action, drive private sector investment and support people and communities in disproportionately vulnerable situations. The National Adaptation Plan will set the frameworks to drive this change and respond to the findings of the first pass risk assessment. Public consultation is now open. Have your say on the National Adaptation Plan issues paper that will inform the development of the plan over 2024. Read more. First National Climate Risk Assessment Report released. National Climate Risk Assessment and National Adaptation Plan DCSU. National Climate Resilience and Adaptation Strategy DCSU. Back to top. Belinda Ingram calls for compulsory rock fishing safety measures, 55 years after family tragedy, ABC News. Arms crossed and shoulders slumped, 5-year-old Belinda Ingram née Barringer watched her brother, father and grandfather from the gate of her Kangaroo Valley home as they headed out to fish on the coast. From a family whose favorite pastime was food foraging, the little girl was upset she was not allowed to tag along. I was mad and cranky and wouldn't say goodbye, she said. I never saw them again. From that day forth, she never let anyone leave without a proper farewell. Horrific triple drowning. Later that day, on Saturday, March 8, 1969, the bodies of her brother Wayne, 7, and her grandfather Seaman Van Hoogen, 57, were discovered lifeless in the waters off Bombo Headland on the New South Wales south coast. Her father Lawrence, 30, was not found for another week. Former Kiama paramedic Bill Carey can still recall specific details of the scene more than 5 decades on. Australians would have gone running to the beach, the weather was so nice, Mr. Carey said. I remember I could see the wet rocks a good 20 feet above where the water usually washed in. An incident report would later reveal the 3 was swept off the rocks by a freak wave at the Bombo Headland while fishing and drowned. You never forget seeing a body, and it's just 10 feet away from you, floating on the surface, and you're not able to do anything but retrieve it, Mr. Carey. said, "Rock fishing is a very risky sport. In the past 5 years, the Illawarra's picturesque coastline has attracted thousands of keen anglers, 13 of whom have died. Despite numerous education campaigns, warning signs and baseline safety legislation, there has been no reduction in rock fishing-related deaths." Michael Buey, a 72-year-old Campbelltown man, became the latest rock fishing tragedy when he went missing at the Kiama Blow last month. The pastime is now the third most common cause of drowning in New South Wales. It was believed Mr. Buey was not wearing a life jacket. MS Ingram wants rock fishers to think about the consequences of an accident for their loved ones if they do not wear a life jacket. "Rock fishing is a very risky sport. Every other sport has safety equipment, even driving and riding, all of which have been implemented to lessen the chance of death," she said. "Why doesn't everyone wear life jackets?" Last year, Wollongong was the only South Coast council to opt into the Rock Fishing Safety Act 2016, making life jackets mandatory for rock fishing at high-risk locations. Mrs. Ingram, who no longer lives on the coast, believes both life jackets and beacons should be legislated statewide instead. "I've been told life jackets are too expensive and cumbersome to wear. That can't be an excuse," she said. "I can't bear to even look at photos of the rocks, or see any more, so if I can prevent someone going through what I've gone through, I'm going to speak out." Helmets, anchor systems needed. If baseline safety measures like life jackets were legislated statewide, Bill Carey believes he wouldn't still lie awake at night haunted by the scene of the Barringer family tragedy. "I do understand safety equipment didn't really exist back then, but even now, what's in place is not good enough," Mr. Carey said. The now 78-year-old says the mere danger of rock fishing demands the compulsory use of helmets and backline anchor systems which, through a rope, fix the participant to the headland. "The more I have thought about it over the years, the more important I think it is to protect their heads. It's no good if you are unconscious and face down in the water," he said. "And the line wouldn't have to restrict the movement of the person, just an efficient way to reel them back in. If we don't put these things in place, it's just going to keep happening." Get our local newsletter, delivered free each Thursday. Federal government to invest $840 in Arafura Rare Earths project in Central Australia. ABC News. In short, the Commonwealth will cover up to $840 million to develop the nation's first combined rare earths mine and refinery, located in Central Australia. The government says the investment will help Australia secure its position as a renewable energy superpower. What's next? The mine will produce the rare earths neodymium and praseodymium, which are used by magnet manufacturers and in EV and renewable energy supply chains. The federal government will back a rare earths mine and processing facility in Central Australia with an $840 million loans and grants package, amid heightened global competition for critical minerals. The money will go to the Gina Rinehart-backed mining company Arafura to further develop its Nolans project, a rare earth mine 125 kilometers north of Alice Springs, with the government saying the project will position Australia as a leader in ethical and sustainable manufacturing of rare earths. Federal Resources Minister Madeleine King said the Commonwealth was investing in the project to ensure Australia could capitalise on its vast deposits of rare minerals. The main consideration is that we compete on the world stage with our natural resources. Principally, this is about competition, she told ABC Radio National on Thursday morning. For too long, we have sent some of our raw minerals out to be processed in a competitor nation, but now we believe we should do more of that here. The decision comes a day after the federal government announced another $230 million loan commitment from taxpayers and banks for West Australian lithium developer Liontown Resources, which is also partly owned by MS Rinehart. The Albanese government said the Arafura project was set to become Australia's first combined rare earths mine and refinery and would help secure Australia's position as a renewable energy superpower. According to the government, it will create more than 200 jobs during construction and about 125 ongoing jobs. This will create local jobs and economic opportunities, helping Australian and territory companies and workers capture more value from the game-changing critical minerals deposits we have here, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said. MS King said it was necessary for the government to invest heavily in the sector now so Australia could establish its place in global rare earth markets. Rare earth supply chains are at risk around the world because these rare earths are hard to find and they are hard to extract and process, she said. What we find is because of the thin markets for these things and really low volumes. Rare earths are different. They're riskier, and they need government support to make sure that they get started and draw in that private capital. The Arafura project is focused on producing the rare earths, neodymium and praseodymium, which are used by global magnet manufacturers and are part of the supply chain for EVs, wind turbines and defense capabilities. According to the Arafura website, the company has supply agreements with South Korean auto company Hyundai, Kia, Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy and the funding package for the project includes $495 million from the Critical Minerals Facility, $200 million through the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility NAIF, $115 million from Export Finance Australia's commercial account, and a further $30 million in grants. Its announcement follows the signing of several other major funding deals in the Northern Territory this week, including a $4 billion package for remote Indigenous housing and $1 billion for adoption as Mr. Albanese and his cabinet colleagues visit the territory. The government's backing of the Arafura project comes after a broad collapse in the global prices of critical minerals. By the end of January, the price of lithium had dropped more than 80% within a year. In February, MS King said she would put nickel on the critical minerals list, giving nickel miners access to a $4 billion fund. Following a weakening of nickel prices, MS King said Australia would need more mining, not less, to meet global climate targets, and to build the solar panels, batteries and wind farms necessary to reduce emissions. Posted 13 hours ago through 14th March 2024 at 12:58 p.m. TikTok faces shutdown as U.S. House of Representatives sends ban bill to the Senate. Here's what you need to know. ABC News. TikTok users in the United States could soon be shut out of the popular app, as House of Representatives politicians move forward with a bill giving its Chinese-based owner ByteDance an ultimatum to sell or face a ban. But what's behind the ban, and could the US actually stamp out the Clock app? Here's what you need to know. What does the bill say? The U.S. House of Representatives legislation essentially gives ByteDance two options: sell TikTok or face a ban. If ByteDance chooses to divest its stake, TikTok will continue to operate in the US. However, this only happens if the president determines through an interagency process that the platform is no longer being controlled by a foreign adversary. The bill would also require ByteDance to give up control of TikTok's well-known algorithm, which feeds users content based on their preferences. Experts have said it will be challenging for ByteDance to sell TikTok in a few months. If the company chooses not to sell, TikTok would be prohibited from app stores until a divestiture occurs, according to the bill. Why the concern? US politicians, alongside law enforcement and intelligence officials, have long expressed concerns over the app's link to China. They fear Chinese authorities could force ByteDance to hand over DATAON, the 170 million Americans who use it. The fear isn't unfounded. China has a set of national security laws that compel organizations to assist with intelligence gathering, and this could include ByteDance. TikTok has denied assertions. It could be used as a tool of the Chinese government. The company has said it has never shared US user data with Chinese authorities and won't do so if it's asked. To date, the US government has not provided any evidence, which shows TikTok has shared such information with Chinese authorities. Other concerns are that TikTok censors content unfavorable about China, which TikTok also denies. The U.S. Office of the Director of National Intelligence also warned in a report on Monday that the Chinese government has used TikTok to influence recent U.S. elections. Will TikTok shut down now? In short, no. The Senate would also need to pass the measure for it to become law. But it's unclear what will happen then, as several bills aimed at banning TikTok have stalled in the Senate. President Joe Biden has said he will sign the bill if politicians pass it. If that happens, ByteDance would have 180 days to sell TikTok to a qualified buyer. Even then, the proposal could still be challenged by the company in court. Experts predict app users could also continue to use the app via virtual private networks, or VPNs, in the case of a shutdown. Has a TikTok ban been threatened before? In 2020, former President Donald Trump attempted to ban the social media platform through an executive order. This was later blocked by the courts after TikTok sued. The Trump administration also brokered a deal in 2020 that would have had U.S. corporations, including Walmart, take a large stake in TikTok on national security grounds. But the sale never went through, for a number of reasons. The Biden administration revoked Trump's executive order, but continued a review of the platform by the Secretive Committee on Foreign Investment. The White House acknowledged in February the review remains ongoing. Other efforts from U.S. politicians to enact nationwide bans were stalled last year, amid lobbying from TikTok and users. How are TikTokers reacting? Small businesses who rely on the platform for marketing or to sell products on the TikTok shop warned against the ban. Some TikTok influencers, who say they use the app to acquire brand deals and other types of income, headed to Washington this week to participate in a lobbying blitz against the bill. As for users, TikTok has petitioned them to call their representatives about the measure, which it characterized as a TikTok shutdown. The company told users Congress was planning a total ban on the platform, which could damage millions of businesses, destroy the livelihoods of countless creators across the country, and deny artists an audience. On Thursday, many users responded by inundating congressional offices with calls, leading some to shut off their phones. What about Australia? TikTok estimated last June it has 8,500,000 Australians and 350,000 businesses using the app, and that number continues to grow. Its Australian branch has said it does not, and would not, share its data with any foreign government. But that hasn't stopped Australian politicians from also worrying about the app. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese told WSFM radio on Thursday he had no plans to ban TikTok. "We'll take advice, but we have no plans to do that," he said when asked by host Brendan Jones. I think you've got to be pretty cautious. You've always got to have national security concerns front and center. But you also need to acknowledge that for a whole lot of people, this provides a way of them communicating. We haven't got advice at this stage to do that. In a statement, a spokesperson for TikTok in Australia said they welcomed Mr. Albanese's comments. Any changes to TikTok in Australia would have a significant impact on the 350,000 businesses and more than 8.5 million Australians who use the app to connect and grow their businesses. The spokesperson said the US legislation was not based in fact. In December, the Australian Information Commission launched investigations into the app after it was accused of taking data from the devices of people who don't even have TikTok. The Australian government also banned TikTok on government-issued devices last April, based on advice from intelligence and security agencies. Some politicians, including NSW Green Senator David Shoebridge, labelled the move another political push against China, saying data harvesting occurred across other social media platforms. ABC/AP posted 17 hours ago. Does Australia need a "don't be a jerk" law to stop unfair business conduct? Consumer groups say yes. ABC News. Ruby Callahan has tried for 6 months to stop one of the world's retail giants from charging her unwanted fees. Key points. The government is looking to introduce new laws that crack down on unfair business behavior. It believes unacceptable business conduct is going unpunished in Australia. Consumer groups say more than 3/4 of Australians have struggled to unsubscribe from a service. Ms. Callahan's ordeal with her Amazon Prime Video subscription began in March, when she tried to cancel her account. When she first signed up in 2021, the cost was about $7 per month. However, a year later the cost rose to about $22. She later visited the company's website and thought she had successfully cancelled her subscription, but the charges kept coming. In desperation, Ms. Callahan cancelled her bank card to stop the payments. "Just start to finish, they're horrible," she said. The 28-year-old is disappointed a tech company which had sales worth $500 billion last year would treat her so poorly. "I've used quite a few swear words," she laughed. "I have actually ranted to my parents just how frustrated I am to not get anywhere." In July, she emailed Amazon to complain and demand reimbursement, saying the website was impossible to use. "I ended my subscription months ago. I also went into my Amazon account and it states that I have no active subscription," she wrote. Ms. Callahan said she received an automatic reply, but no one answered her email. "Do you know about an unfair business practice you want us to investigate? Email Michaelatkin@protonmail.com. Yeah, that's pretty crook. Consumer groups call what happened to MS Keller a subscription trap. That's where a business makes it very easy for you to start paying them money and it's very difficult for you to stop, Erin Turner, the CEO of the Consumer Policy Research Center CPRC, told the ABC. You typically can sign up in one click, and until recently, Amazon Australia had a multi-step, hard-to-find process to stop paying them money. Amazon has been treating its customers as cash cows. CPRC research shows more than 3/4 of Australians have had trouble cancelling subscriptions. The Albanese government is concerned about what it calls unfair trading practices, including subscription traps, and is looking at introducing legislation to counter it. Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones said while the practices were harmful to consumers and small businesses, they were currently legal. I think the name unfair trading sort of captures a lot of behavior, Mr. Jones said. It might not yet be unlawful, but I think when you look at the sort of behaviors, Australians would go, yeah. That's pretty crook. Why is that allowed to happen? What could a new law cover? Manipulative digital design practices which unfairly influence consumer behavior. Predatory or aggressive business conduct. Difficulty opting out or cancelling goods and services. Hiding crucial information which becomes misleading. Harmful and excessive online tracking and collection of customer data. The government will soon release a discussion paper on the type of unfair conduct a new law could cover and has provided an advance copy to the ABC. Many kinds of shocking business behaviour are already prohibited under Australia's consumer laws, such as unconscionable conduct, misleading or deceptive conduct, and unfair contract terms. For years, the consumer watchdog and consumer groups have argued those laws have specific definitions that limit their practical application. One solution could be to look overseas where there are laws, nicknamed Don't Be a Jerk laws, which target unfair behavior. We definitely need that here, Ms. Turner said. Mr. Jones said he believed unacceptable conduct was going unpunished in Australia. What we've seen emerging over the last few years is some harmful practices, which fall between the gaps and the cracks in the Australian consumer law, he said. Mr. Jones said Australia was playing catch-up with other major economies. This exists in all the biggest markets around the world, he said. The discussion papers 4 options. 1.no change. 2. Changing existing law involving unconscionable conduct to include unfair conduct. 3. A general ban on unfair trading practices similar to the US, UK, European Union and Singapore. 4. General and specific bans on unfair trading practices. The push is likely to face opposition from big business, which has previously warned it could have unintended consequences, like making it harder for new players to enter markets, which could reduce competition. The government said it would consider the feedback before drafting legislation next year. Amazon offers refund after contact from the ABC. Amazon, which earned around $54 billion last year from worldwide subscriptions, is already in hot water overseas because of its alleged conduct. The U.S. Federal Trade Commission is suing the company, alleging it tricked millions of consumers into signing up for Prime. It has claimed Amazon trapped customers using deceptive design tricks dubbed dark patterns to sign up for auto-renewing subscriptions, while making the processing of unsubscribing more difficult. Amazon's leadership slowed or rejected changes that would have made it easier for users to cancel Prime, the FTC's lawsuit claims. Amazon has labeled the allegations false, and said both signing up and cancelling was a clear and simple process for subscribers. However, Erin Turner said she investigated Amazon's subscription practices in Australia and discovered practices found to be unfair in the EU were underway here. While Amazon has stopped its poor subscription practices recently, it still hasn't answered for the money it's cost Australians up until now, she said. Amazon declined an interview request, but after being contacted by the ABC offered Ruby Keller a refund of $280. The company confirmed Ms. Callahan did successfully cancel her Prime membership in March, but did not answer questions about why she continued to be charged after unsubscribing, or why her monthly fee had increased to $22. In a statement, an Amazon spokesperson said the company regretted Ms. Callahan did not have a positive shopping experience. We updated the Prime cancellation process recently in Australia. The updates are consistent with those made in Europe during 2022 and the US earlier this year, the spokesperson said. Both the prior and new cancellation process are clear, simple, and comply with applicable law. Cost of living. Ask us a question or share your story. If you're unable to
more about feminist issues than I ever thought I would. I joke, but only quietly, that I've read more feminist literature in the last 3 years than most men would read in 5 lifetimes. But it doesn't matter. It's made me a better
Yeah, I keep on joking with him that he wants my job as a sex discrimination commissioner.
I do not want to be the next sex discrimination commissioner. God, that would cause some dramas, wouldn't it?
I think they're personal friends. I think that Liz Broderick helped General Morrison see the extent of the work that we have to do.
Australia's Defence Force is tonight reeling from
just the latest in a string of cases over many years, from acts of ritual bastardisation to horrifying tales of brutal sexual assault.
We're not here dealing with a few bad apples.
Sexual harassment and abuse exists today in the ADF.
Liz Broderick's intervention and bringing 3 young women in to tell their stories was a change agent for his understanding of the issues.
My idea to David and what I said to him was, I want you to come as David Morrison, human being, to listen deeply to another human being.
There are 3 army women. 2 of them are serving officers and 1 is a former soldier who has now left the army. And for 6 hours I listened to stories that demonstrated the anguish, the hurt that they had felt. I felt absolutely 100% responsible for what had happened to them. And I still do.
He describes it as a life-changing moment.
It's been a great honour to be the Chief of Army, but I don't think anyone would begrudge me saying that it's been a pretty hard appointment.
I think the further up the military pyramid that is gone, the fewer colleagues.
"50 years on, Bruce Lee's legacy squares up to modern life in Hong Kong." Reuters. Kyung Kuk Yuanlong District Secondary School students attend a nunchaku performance event by the sea. In a tribute to the late martial artist and actor Bruce Lee, ahead of National Security Education Day, in Hong Kong, China, April 14, 2023. Bruce Lee's contributions to martial arts, film, and philosophy have inspired legions of global fans, but the legacy that endured for half a century is sometimes seen as a relic of the past in the former British colony. The swift pace of life in one of the world's most expensive cities often conflicts with the time and effort required to master the traditional martial art, while soaring rents make it tough to set up schools. Reuters/Tyrone Sir. By Jesse Pang. Hong Kong. Reuters. 50 years after the death of Bruce Lee, who galvanized the imaginations of generations of young people worldwide with feats of kung fu. Immortalized on screen, it sometimes seems as if his legacy of the martial art he practiced is fading in Hong Kong. Born in San Francisco but brought up in the Asian financial hub which would make him famous, Lee died of brain edema aged 32 on July 20, 1973. Just 6 days before the release of Enter the Dragon, his most popular film. He was exceptionally talented and it's a shame he passed away at such a young age, said 60-year-old Dorothy Tam, whose hair is now graying. As she punched a sandbag in a small, martial arts school covered with bamboo scaffolding in Western Kowloon. Captivated by the skill displayed in Lee's performance, Tam, who was just 10 at the time, became a lifelong admirer. For photo essay, please click on. But only in 2019 did Tam overcome her initial apprehension about Hong Kong's male-dominated martial arts scene to start learning Wing Chun, the southern Chinese style of the martial art in which Lee had trained. I discovered it's actually a martial art, suitable for women as well, emphasizing softness to overcome hardness, said Tam. As she stood beside a bronze bust of Lee's teacher, the late Grandmaster IP Man. She began learning with her godson, but her classmates come from all walks of life, some working in information technology and others in business consulting. Most train at night, some still in their office wear. Martial arts are not solely about fighting, Tam added. My instructor often emphasizes that self-defense is about avoiding conflict and focusing on self-improvement. Lee's contributions to martial arts, film, and philosophy have inspired legions of fans across the world. But the legacy that endured for half a century is sometimes seen as a relic of the past in the former British colony. B. Water. On his return from Hollywood in 1971, Lee made 4 Hong Kong films in just 2 years, among them Fist of Fury and Way of the Dragon. He helped popularize Kung Fu through such blockbuster films and a hit American television series, The Green Hornet. But Wing Chun exponents have struggled to win disciples. The swift pace of life in one of the world's most expensive cities often conflicts with the time and effort required to master the traditional martial art, while soaring rents make it tough to set up schools. The rent is very expensive, and student tuition fees are not enough to cover that, said Dennis Lee, chairman of the Vingson Athletic Association, where Tam practices. How can you make it your career? The association holds classes, social events and arranges annual tomb sweeping ceremonies for IP Man, under whom Bruce Lee studied at the age of 13. But of late, attendance at the rituals has been dropping off. Set up in 1967 by 7 Hong Kong disciples of Lee's influential teacher, the association functions out of a flat bought to serve as its headquarters. Staying mostly unchanged for 6 decades, with original brown tiles still intact. Dennis Lee, 52, a disciple of the teacher's son, was also drawn to Wing Chun by the example of the actor, and eventually set up his own school. Though it has not been easy. Kung Fu is an art, and art is lifelong, added Lee, who runs a logistics firm on the side to supplement his income as he balances the pace of modern life with the dedication required for mastery. Even so, some enthusiasts, such as Iranian-Australian Nima King, trained by another student of IP Man, have sought to reshape the teaching style. The curriculum of his school, opened in 2008, is more modernized to target an international clientele, including children. I like Kung Fu, said 3-1/2-year-old Sabi Peng, one of a group of pre-schoolers wearing purple and white uniforms who sparred in a brightly lit studio. Still, Bruce Lee, who developed his own martial arts form, Jeet Kune Do, has not entirely been eclipsed in the Chinese-ruled city. One of his most famous maxims, "Be water, my friend," from an interview in 1971, inspired 2019's pro-democracy movement. It provided a template for months of wildcat protests citywide against Beijing's Taiping grip of Hong Kong, which returned to Chinese rule in 1997. Even though he has been dead for 50 years, Li indirectly influenced King's career, the instructor said. It's not just about the movies. We respect that spirit. And that's why we've got to work hard to keep preserving it, he added. That's Bruce's legacy. Reporting by Jesse Pang, Tyrone Sun, Joyce Cho, editing by James Pomfret and Clarence Fernandez. Copyright 2023 Thomson Reuters. Archived content refoiled Chile, information on the relationship between the Carabineros police force and the military, and on the recourse available to a citizen who has been victimized by members of either or both forces. Archived on 4th June 2023. Home.
Chile struggles with economic stagnation, Atlantic Council. Andres Velasco. Table of Contents. Evolution of Freedom. The Economic Freedom Subindex suggests that Chile is a country with open markets and a very open economy. But at the margin it has become less so over the last 10 years. This decline has mostly been driven by policy decisions that increased government regulation of markets. Greater regulation was mostly welcome, but there may have been areas, like the length of time required to obtain approval for investment projects, where the trend has gone too far. Most of the decline on the Economic Freedom Subindex is attributable to changes in the trade freedom and investment freedom indicators. But the obvious measures of trade freedom, such as tariffs and non-tariff barriers, have all been relatively flat or even improved over the last decade. And the last remaining capital controls were abolished 15 years ago. Perhaps the explanation for this puzzle can be found in the property rights indicator, which has decreased in a mild but sustained fashion since 2010. Judicial procedures in Chile have become longer and more unpredictable, while processes related to obtaining permits have become maddeningly lengthy. As a result of these and other changes, the investment environment has deteriorated. Perhaps these measures partly explain the change in the trade and investment freedom indicators. Regarding political freedom, the data presented seem like an inaccurate reflection of reality and are very hard to rationalize. Yes, Chile has become more politically fragmented and volatile, but civil liberties have not worsened. Perhaps a mild change in this subindex since 2019 could follow from the heavy-handed reaction to street unrest late that year. followed by the relatively stringent restrictions introduced in 2020 to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. But the data suggest a decline starting in 2015, which makes very little sense. On legal freedom, the deterioration in the corruption indicator during the last 15 years is attributable to a series of corruption scandals reported in the country. Here, as ever, it is hard to discern whether corrupt practices are now more prevalent or whether legal changes mean that more cases are being reported. Both could be true. It is possible that certain corrupt practices have indeed become more prevalent. But also keep in mind that the last decade and a half has seen a number of changes in competition law and campaign finance regulations, which do make it easier to detect such practices. In terms of security, it is clear that Chile has experienced a sustained deterioration regarding crime and safety on the streets. There is an active debate in Chile about the drivers of this trend. Some blame it on immigration, although there is limited evidence to support such a claim. Or rather, immigration may have changed the nature of certain crimes and increase in the use of firearms, for instance, but not the overall incidence of crime. Other factors, like a growing drug trade and the presence of foreign drug gangs, may also have had an impact. Whatever the cause, it is likely that security in large cities has worsened. Even though Chile remains one of the best performers in the region when it comes to crime and citizen security. From freedom to prosperity, Chile is a more prosperous nation than most others in the region. Its economy grew faster than most of its neighbors between the end of the last century and a decade ago. But recently growth has slowed. It is surprising that the data seem to show a larger decline in prosperity for Chile than for the rest of the region during the 2008-10 financial crisis, when Chile was undoubtedly the country with the smallest recession and experienced the most limited impact on economic activity in the whole of Latin America. This is, once again, a case in which the data presented make very little sense. There is little doubt that Chile is an unequal country. But again, the data presented in this report tell a story that can scarcely be believed. The data suggest a sharp deterioration in income distribution, while the Gini coefficient computed by the government of Chile and by the World Bank shows a steady improvement since 1990, followed by a predictable deterioration during the pandemic and a slight recovery in the last 2 or 3 years. The inequality indicator of the Prosperity Index shows a completely different pattern. It may be due to the fact that the indicator measures the share of income of the top 10% of the distribution, which is a very partial view of income distribution. The minority rights indicator has not shown much movement in recent years, though Chile's score is reasonably high. However, it is important to stress that this is largely because the indicator uses religious liberty as a proxy, whereas the real conflict in Chile is not religious but ethnic. If one had some measure of the situation of indigenous minorities, especially that of Mapuches in the south of Chile, the picture might look different. Regarding the environment, Chile has a serious air pollution problem, both in big cities and smaller ones, but for different reasons. In the former, the number of cars per capita has increased substantially, and the move away from coal in the generation of electricity has been slow. In the smaller cities in the south of the country, by contrast, wood-burning stoves are the principal method of domestic heating. This is very polluting, especially if the wood is not fully dry. There have been several educational reforms in Chile in the last 25 years, some more successful than others. But it seems unlikely that any of these could explain the complete stagnation in years of schooling in the 2007-11 period. There was a reform at the time that generated a movement of pupils among different types of schools, but not a decrease in enrollment. Moreover, spending per student increased significantly around this time, and the share of each cohort going to university reached the 50% mark in this period. The future ahead. Chile faces 2 big challenges in the coming years, one economic and one political. The big economic challenge is to restore growth, which has slowed substantially in the last decade. Productivity growth, which was very fast late in the 20th century and in the beginning of this century, has also petered out. Investment rates have not dropped, but nor have they increased. Chile was once a country experiencing rapid diversification of exports, and that process has also come to a halt. So, when it comes to prosperity, the big question is, why was the fast growth period in Chile so short-lived? Standard economic theory predicts that, as a country becomes richer, its growth slows due to convergence with high-income economies. So one might have expected fast growth in Chile until the country's standards of living had reached the level of South Korea. Instead, fast growth seems to have stopped with the country still short of the income level of Greece or Portugal. The big political challenge relates to the quality of politics and of democratic decision-making. Since 2010, politics has become more polarized and a great deal more fragmented. Chile went from having 7 parties represented in Congress at that time to 22 today. Indices of satisfaction with the performance of democracy, and also indices of trust in government, political parties, the judiciary, the police, the media, business lobbies, unions, and so on, have all deteriorated. It seems that Chileans do not trust anyone anymore. That is a worldwide trend, but in Chile it might be a little more pronounced than elsewhere. Chile's answer has been to try to rewrite the constitution. We have already tried twice, and failed, and the third attempt is also looking like a failure. Former President Michelle Bachelet drafted a new constitution in her second term 2014-18, but ran out of time to get it approved. A constitutional convention, dominated by the far left, was chosen in 2021 and wrote a questionable text that was rejected by 62% of voters in a referendum in 2022. A new convention was then elected, this time controlled by the far right, which produced a similarly partisan text that is similarly failing to attract widespread support. Polls suggest that the text will be again rejected by voters when it is put to a referendum in December 2023. Andrés Velasco is a former finance minister of Chile and a current professor of public policy and dean of the School of Public Policy at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Explore the data. Image: members of different Chilean groups performed during the cultural carnival in Valparaiso City, about 75 miles 120 kilometers northwest of Santiago, January 24, 2010. Valparaiso celebrates the beginning of the year of Chile's bicentenary with art activities in public places. Chile celebrates 200 years of independence on September 18, 2010. Reuters/Eliseo Fernandez, Chile, Tags, Anniversary Society. Investing in Women Accelerates Prosperity and Peace, Atlantic Council. By some accounts, the global economy is finally looking up in 2024, lifted by the perhaps unexpected strength of the U.S. economy and buoyed by cooling inflation, supply chain smoothing, and increasing employment worldwide. At the same time, a potent mix of geopolitical challenges, including debt, conflict, and increasing climate events, threaten to cloud this otherwise sunny outlook. And there are still divergences among countries in terms of economic resilience and recovery, as well as persistent, if not widening, inequalities within them. The divergences caused by fragility, conflict, and violence (FCV) situations are particularly stark, as the incidence of conflict events has increased 40% since 2020, to the highest number of events since World War II. Half of the world's poor live in FCV-affected countries, and that number is expected to rise to 60% by 2030. In part as the duration of conflicts extends to now an average of 20 years. In addition to the death, destruction, and disruptions they cause, conflict and fragility are disincentives to investment and further undermine economic growth. 1/5 of International Monetary Fund member countries are considered fragile and conflict-affected situations, FCS, and 20 of the most climate-vulnerable economies are also on the World Bank's FCS list. According to the most recent Women, Peace, and Security Index, in 2022, approximately 600 million women, 15% of women in the world, lived within 50 kilometers of armed conflict, more than double the levels in the 1990s. These numbers don't lie, but they also don't necessarily tell the whole truth. And the truth is that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by fragility and conflict economically, socially, and politically. The impacts are well documented. The data show, for example, that women and girls are more likely to see their educations disrupted, are more vulnerable to gender-based violence and are more likely to be displaced or become refugees. Women often face much greater economic hardships than men in conflict-affected areas, as well. Notably, 6 out of 10 of the World Bank's FCS countries are in the lower quartile on the Economic Participation and Opportunity Subindex on the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index, indicating wider gender gaps and more challenges facing women in conflict contexts. Similarly, a majority of FCV countries can be found in the bottom of the latest Women Business and the Low rankings released on March 4. These impacts also further undermine economies. The World Bank estimates that gender-based violence costs some countries up to 3.7% of gross domestic product, GDP, and a 1% increase in violence against women lowers economic activity by 9%. The roles women hold during conflict and reconstruction. But there can be opportunities for women's economic empowerment in conflict and reconstruction, as well. Women are experiencing these outcomes despite the important role they play in economies during conflict, in post-conflict reconstruction, and in efforts to sustain peace. Most of today's FCV economies are characterized by low female labor force participation. For example, in 2022, the United Nations estimated that closing gender gaps in women's labor force participation in Yemen would increase that country's GDP by 27%. War has historically created windows of opportunity for women to fulfill workforce shortages, including in male-dominated fields, since men make up a majority of combatants. War, often coupled with crippling inflation, makes finding paid work more acceptable and, importantly, this openness tends to continue as income generation changes women's economic value and power in society. In the United States, for example, women took to manufacturing and government administration for the war industry and beyond during World War II. With 19 million women entering the U.S. workforce during this period. Today, women continue to join or rejoin the workforce, including in the informal sector, at higher rates amid conflict and take on more culturally non-traditional jobs. For instance, Ukrainian women have joined its mining workforce, filling the gaps left by conscription after Russia's invasion. Like most economies worldwide, micro, small and medium-sized enterprises dominate the market landscape of fragile and conflict-torn countries. Even though these smaller businesses face more startup and operational constraints, they provide a key pathway for women's economic participation during conflict and on the road to recovery. A study in Syria estimated that the proportion of female entrepreneurs increased from a low base of 4.4% in 2009 to 22.4% by 2017. This includes women-owned and led businesses engaging in supply chains, including in the logistics, information, and communication technology, infrastructure, and public works sectors, all of which are critical to reconstruction. And as women workers and their businesses earn more, especially in the formal economy, they can mitigate the otherwise dampening domestic resource mobilization associated with reduced economic activity, investment, and government administration during conflict or destabilization. Women's greater participation in the economy during conflict and reconstruction can also increase consumption and income utilization, including from cash transfers or other social protection mechanisms, as women recirculate their earnings with spending on their families. How to wield prosperity and peace dividends with and for women. Gender inclusion cannot be an afterthought. Policymakers must address the immediate economic security and income needs of women during conflict, while empowering them to contribute to and benefit from recovery, reconstruction, and growth. This means providing context-specific, targeted social protections and addressing the issues that undermine women's economic participation. It requires mitigating and responding to gender-based violence, as well as improving accessibility and affordability of child and elder care. It also means supporting women entrepreneurs and women-led small businesses, closing education or skill gaps, and addressing social and cultural norms that limit career choices or workforce participation with conflict or fragility-sensitive knowledge, design, and delivery mechanisms. Depending on the type, level, and stage of FCV, as well as the economic landscape, certain FCV-specific interventions can also make a difference in women's economic empowerment. These include, for example, enabling women's earning employment and entrepreneurship by expanding opportunities in gig and home-based economies and increasing safe and reliable transportation to and from work or school. Policymakers should also take steps to improve access to education and training with attention to language, as well as the demand for and portability of skills and certifications. In addition to addressing persistent systemic and policy hurdles, women business owners and entrepreneurs need targeted support with more risk financing, know-how, and market entry and development. This includes leveraging sizable development and humanitarian assistance and procurement. The United Nations Office for Project Services, UNOPS, for example, bought over $1.8 billion worth of goods and services in 2022 from suppliers worldwide, with 56% local spending, aligned with system-wide on gender-responsive procurement initiatives. UNOPS is piloting and beginning to scale programs to train and prepare women business owners to successfully bid and execute their tenders. These women can then use the investment, experience, and credibility gained from working with UNOPS to obtain other public and private sector contracts and optimize supply chain opportunities. Increasing digital inclusion can be transformative for women's financial inclusion and economic participation, as well, including by training women for information and communication technology jobs in the digital economy. Like the World Bank Rockefeller Foundation's Click on Kajana project in Nigeria, policymakers should prioritize increasing women's access to and utilization of digital tools and platforms, including digital money and financial services, as well as remote learning and government technology. Digital mechanisms can also serve as useful aspects of larger initiatives that empower women's participation and leadership, which is critical for conflict mitigation and durable peace building. The evidence that expanding economic opportunities for women is intertwined with building inclusive and sustainable growth, as well as peace and social progress, is only accruing with time, experience, and data. On Thai's International Women's Day, aptly themed Invest in Women, Accelerate Progress, it is incumbent upon all leaders, investors, and policymakers to heed this call. Public and private sector actors would do well to invest and enable increased women's economic participation to catalyze prosperity and peace. Nicole Golden is a non-resident senior fellow at the Geoeconomic Center. Further reading. Image: demonstrators take part in an International Women's Day rally as women strike to demand the end to domestic and racist violence, wars, and the country's prevailing macho culture in Rome, Italy, March 8, 2024. Reuters/Yara Nardi.
Oh, God, amiga, go, todo es true, at the truth is true, God is true, finito God.